Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. The first call came just after midnight. My phone vibrated on my nightstand, jolting me awake. I answered groggily, but there was only silence on the other end. Thinking it was a wrong number, I hung up and went back to sleep. The calls continued over the next few nights, always at odd hours. Each time I answered, there was nothing but silence. I tried speaking, demanding to know who was calling, but no response ever came. Eventually, I blocked the number, hoping that would end it. The next night, another call came from a different number. I let it ring, refusing to answer, but the caller was persistent. Each night, a new number would appear, and the pattern repeated. It was as if someone was determined to get through to me without ever saying a word. I began feeling uneasy in my own home. My phone was always on silent now, but the missed calls still appeared in my call log. I told myself it was just some prank, maybe a robocall glitch, but deep down I wasn't convinced. The silence on the other end felt deliberate, almost watching. One evening I decided to answer again. "Who is this?" I asked sharply, gripping my phone. Silence stretched for too long, making my skin crawl. Just as I was about to hang up, I heard the faintest sound breathing, slow and steady. A chill ran through me as I listened. "Say something," I demanded, but the breathing continued. My pulse quickened, and I hung up, my hands shaking. I immediately checked my doors and windows, making sure they were locked. I confided in my friend the next day, hoping for a rational explanation. "Probably just a scammer," she said, but I could tell she was unsettled too. I wanted to believe it was harmless, but my gut told me otherwise. Someone was fixated on me, and they weren't stopping. That night, I left my phone on the coffee table, determined to ignore the calls. Around 2 a.m., my phone rang again, the number unfamiliar. I didn't move, pretending not to hear it. A minute later, my landline rang, a phone I hadn't used in years. Fear gripped me as I stared at the phone. Only a handful of people had that number, and none of them would call at this hour. Slowly I reached for it and answered. The same silence greeted me, followed by that unnerving, steady breathing. I hung up and called the police, explaining the situation in a shaky voice. They assured me they'd look into it, but I could tell they didn't take it seriously. To them, it was just an annoyance, a prank at best, but I knew it was more than that. I tried to sleep, but every creak in the house made me jump. My paranoia grew until I couldn't take it anymore. I left my bedroom light on and sat on my bed, phone in hand. Hours passed without another call, but I felt no relief. I wasn't alone, even if I couldn't see anyone. Morning brought no peace. The calls had stopped for now, but the unease remained. I considered changing my number, but a nagging thought held me back. If I changed it, would they still find me? Would they escalate in other ways? That night I decided to record the call if it happened again. At 1:43 a.m. my phone rang. I answered and let the silence drag on. My heart pounded as I pressed record. A minute passed before the breathing started again, slow and deliberate. Then, finally, something different. A voice, barely above a whisper. "I see you." The call ended abruptly, leaving me frozen in place. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps as I stared at my phone. I didn't sleep that night. As soon as the sun rose, I went to the police station in person. I played the recording for them, my hands trembling. The officer, listening, stiffened slightly but remained professional. "We'll look into it," he said, but I needed more than reassurances. I left feeling just as helpless as before, That evening I had my locks changed and installed security cameras around my house. I hoped that would be enough to deter whoever was doing this. But deep down I wasn't sure anything would stop them. I didn't answer the phone for the next few nights, letting the calls go straight to voicemail. They never left messages, just the endless calls. Then one night my phone rang, but this time it wasn't my number, it was my mother's. My stomach dropped as I answered. "Mom?" Silence. Then, that same breathing. A wave of dread crashed over me as I realized what this meant. They had my mother's number now. They were getting closer. I called her immediately, begging her to be careful. She reassured me that she was fine, but I could hear the worry in her voice. I felt powerless. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about the people I loved. That night I barely slept, constantly checking my phone and the security footage. Around 3 a.m. my motion sensor alert went off. My heart slammed against my ribs as I opened the app. The camera feed showed my front porch, empty except for a single item placed at my door. A cell phone, its screen lit up, ringing. I didn't move for what felt like an eternity. The number calling was my own. Slowly, I backed away from the door, my mind racing. Whoever this was, they weren't just playing games anymore. They were here. The police arrived minutes later, but the caller was already gone. They took the phone as evidence, but I knew it wouldn't lead anywhere. This person was careful, methodical. They wanted me to know they were always watching. I left town the next day, unable to stay in that house any longer. Even miles away, I felt their presence lingering. My phone remained silent for weeks, and I dared to hope it was over. Then, one night, in a new city, with a new number, my phone rang. The caller ID was blocked, but I already knew who it was. I answered, my breath shaky. Silence, then the familiar breathing. A whisper followed, soft and chilling. "Found you." Story 2. The first time I noticed him, I thought nothing of it. The bus stop was always filled with the same faces, people heading to work, students clutching their backpacks, tired commuters lost in their own thoughts. He stood slightly apart from the others, his posture stiff, his eyes locked in my direction. I assumed he was looking past me, waiting for someone, or just staring blankly as people often did. But he was there the next morning, and the morning after that. Always in the same spot, wearing the same dark coat, his hands buried in his pockets. He never looked at his phone, never spoke to anyone. He just stared. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that he was just another commuter. But the longer it went on, the harder it was to ignore. I started altering my routine, leaving a little earlier or a little later to see if he would still be there. No matter what time I arrived, he was waiting. His eyes followed me as I stepped onto the bus, but he never got on. It was as if he had no destination, no purpose except to watch. My skin prickled every time I saw him, but I convinced myself it was paranoia. One morning I decided to confront him. I walked to the bus stop as usual, my hands clenched at my sides, my heart hammering. But when I arrived, he was gone. Relief flooded through me, mixed with a strange sense of unease. I had spent weeks dreading his presence, yet his absence felt just as unsettling. Then I saw the note. It was a small, folded piece of paper wedged between the metal bench and the glass wall of the shelter. My name wasn't on it, but I knew it was for me. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it, my stomach twisting as I read the words written in uneven, jagged handwriting. "I know your route. Route." My breath hitched, and I looked around, half expecting to see him watching from the shadows. The street was empty except for a few early commuters, none of them paying me any attention. I scanned the sidewalks, the alleyways, the windows of the buildings nearby, but he was nowhere in sight. The only thing left of him was the note clenched in my shaking hands. I didn't take the bus that day. Instead, I walked to the next stop, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. My heart pounded with every passing stranger, every car that slowed near me. By the time I arrived at work, my nerves were frayed, my mind racing with possibilities. That night, I double-checked my apartment door, making sure it was locked. I pulled the curtains shut and left the lights on, listening for any sound outside my window. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, my dreams were filled with faceless figures standing just beyond my reach. The next morning, I debated skipping the bus stop altogether. A part of me needed to know if he was there, if this was some twisted joke or something more. My stomach churned as I approached the stop, my eyes scanning the area before I even reached it. He wasn't there. I let out a slow breath, my fingers tightening around the strap of my bag. The bus arrived, and I stepped on, forcing myself to relax as I found a seat near the window. The city blurred past, normal and indifferent, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself that it was over. Then, at the next stop, a man in a dark coat boarded the bus. I froze, my hands gripping my knees. It wasn't him, but he was similar, too similar. My pulse quickened as I watched him take a seat a few rows ahead, facing forward, unmoving. I couldn't see his face clearly, but something about the way he sat, the way his head tilted slightly as if listening, sent a shiver down my spine. I told myself it was a coincidence, that I was letting fear get the best of me. But when I got off at my stop, he followed. He didn't look at me, didn't change his pace, but I felt his presence behind me like a shadow stretching long in the morning light. I turned down a different street, taking the longer route to work. My pulse pounded in my ears as I quickened my pace, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I forced myself not to run, not to panic, but when I glanced over my shoulder, he was still there. I ducked into a small coffee shop, my heart racing as I moved to the counter, pretending to browse the menu. Through the reflection in the glass display case, I saw him stop outside. He stood at the corner, just far enough away to blend in, just close enough to watch. I stayed in the shop longer than necessary, my fingers wrapped tightly around a coffee cup I didn't even want. When I finally stepped outside, he was gone. The street felt too quiet, too empty, but I forced myself to keep moving. At work, I told myself I was safe. The office was filled with people, bright with the artificial glow of computer screens and overhead lights. But the note was still in my pocket, its message pressing against my skin like a warning. That night, I took a different route home. I doubled back, crossed streets randomly, checked behind me at every corner. I saw no one, but the feeling of being watched never faded. My hand shook as I unlocked my apartment door, locking it the second I was inside. The next morning, I didn't go to the bus stop. I didn't take the bus at all. Instead, I took a cab, my eyes darting between the streets as the city passed in a blur. When I reached work, I felt a fleeting sense of relief, but it was short-lived. There was another note waiting for me. It was tucked beneath my keyboard, placed so neatly it almost seemed deliberate. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it, dread curling in my stomach as I read the new message. You can't avoid me forever. I dropped the note as if it burned me, my breath coming in uneven gasps. My coworkers chatted around me, oblivious to the way my hands shook, to the cold fear clawing at my chest. I didn't go home that night. I stayed with a friend, my phone clutched in my hands as I debated calling the police. But what would I tell them? That a man had been watching me. that I had 2 notes with no proof of who left them. Days passed, then weeks. The man never returned to the bus stop. No more notes appeared. The fear didn't fade, but eventually I convinced myself it was over. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe it had been a cruel prank. Then, one night, I woke up to a soft rustling sound outside my bedroom window. My body went rigid, my heart slamming against my ribs. Slowly, I turned my head toward the darkened glass. A piece of paper was pressed against it from the outside, the words scrawled in that same jagged handwriting. I still know your route. It's Story 3. The hallway in my building was familiar, a path I had walked countless times, but today something was different. A door stood at the end of the hall, one I had never noticed before. It was unmarked, blending into the wall, as if it had always been there. I stared at it, trying to remember if I had simply overlooked it in the past, but I knew this building well, and I had never seen a door in that spot before. Curiosity gnawed at me as I approached, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The door was old, its surface scratched and worn, but the handle gleamed as if it had been polished recently. I reached out and grasped the handle, expecting it to be locked. Instead, the moment my fingers brushed against the metal, I heard a soft click. The lock disengaged on its own, the mechanism shifting without resistance. My breath hitched as the door creaked open, revealing a dark, empty space beyond. A musty scent wafted out, the air thick with dust and something else, something faintly metallic. I hesitated, glancing back down the hall to see if anyone else was around. The building was silent. Swallowing my unease, I stepped inside, my hand trailing along the rough wooden frame as I crossed the threshold. The room beyond was nothing like the rest of the building. The walls were lined with wooden paneling, aged and splintered, as if this space had been untouched for decades. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering weakly. The floor was covered in a layer of dust, but there were footprints leading deeper inside footprints that were not mine. I followed them cautiously, my pulse quickening with each step. At the far end of the room stood an old desk, its surface cluttered with yellowed papers. A chair was pulled back slightly, as if someone had just been sitting there. The air felt thick, charged with something unseen. I picked up one of the papers, my fingers leaving clean streaks in the dust. The handwriting was cramped and hurried, the ink faded but still legible. The words sent a chill through me. The door wasn't here before. I don't know how it appeared, but I hear them whispering behind it at night. I dropped the paper, my skin crawling. The words felt too similar to my own thoughts, as if whoever had written them had experienced the same thing. My eyes darted around the room, searching for any other signs of life. The silence was oppressive, pressing in on me from all sides. Then, from the darkness beyond the desk, I heard a sound. A soft, shuffling movement. I froze, my breath shallow as I strained to listen. It came again, the faintest scrape against the wooden floor. My pulse thundered in my ears as I took a slow step back. The air felt colder, heavier. Something was here with me. I turned toward the door, my mind screaming at me to leave. But as I reached for the handle, a sharp whisper cut through the silence. It came from behind me, close enough that I felt the breath against my neck. You shouldn't have opened it. I yanked the door open and stumbled into the hallway, slamming it shut behind me. My chest heaved as I pressed my back against the wood, my heart hammering. The hallway was as it had been before, silent, still. I turned to look at the door, half expecting it to be gone, but it remained solid and real. My fingers trembled as I reached for the handle again, testing it. This time it wouldn't budge. The lock was engaged once more, as if it had never opened in the first place. I backed away slowly, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The hallway was unchanged, the world outside the same as it had been moments ago. But I knew something had shifted, something had noticed me. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow in my room seemed deeper, every sound more pronounced. I told myself it was my imagination, the lingering effects of fear playing tricks on me. Then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it. A soft click. The sound of a door unlocking. And it was coming from inside my apartment. Story 4. The day had been long, and I was exhausted by the time I got home. I dropped my keys on the counter, then set my wallet beside them before heading to my bedroom. Kicking off my shoes, I collapsed onto the bed, letting out a tired sigh. The house was quiet, just the way I liked it. I didn't have any plans for the evening, so I decided to relax for a bit before making dinner. As I lay there, I went over the day in my head, remembering the errands I had run. Grocery shopping, stopping by the bank, filling up my gas tank, routine tasks that blurred together. Nothing out of the ordinary. After resting for a while, I made my way to the kitchen to start preparing dinner. As I passed the counter, I glanced at my keys, expecting to see my wallet beside them. But it wasn't there. I frowned, pausing for a moment. I was certain I had left it there. I checked around the counter, thinking maybe I had absent-mindedly moved it. When I didn't see it, I started looking elsewhere on the dining table, the living room coffee table, even the bathroom counter. Nothing. My stomach tightened slightly. Retracing my steps, I searched the bedroom, digging through the blankets on my bed and checking my nightstand. The wallet was nowhere to be found. Annoyance replaced confusion as I rubbed my forehead. I knew I had put it on the counter. Trying to shake off the frustration, I decided to check my car. Maybe I had left it there without realizing it. I grabbed my keys and stepped outside, the cool evening air sending a small shiver down my spine. Unlocking the car, I opened the driver's side door and leaned in. My breath caught in my throat. Sitting neatly on the passenger seat was my wallet. I stared at it, my mind racing. I hadn't been in my car since I got home. I was sure of that. And yet, there it was, untouched, as if it had been placed there on purpose. I hesitated before reaching for it, my fingers hovering over the worn leather. Slowly, I picked it up and flipped it open, expecting something to be missing. But everything was there: my ID, my credit cards, the cash I had withdrawn from the bank earlier. Nothing had been taken. A strange unease settled over me as I stood there in the dim glow of the streetlights. I glanced around, scanning the quiet neighborhood. No one was outside, no signs of movement. My house stood still behind me, windows dark except for the faint glow of the kitchen light. I swallowed hard, gripping the wallet tighter. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe I had absent-mindedly grabbed it and taken it to the car. Maybe I had left it there earlier and just forgotten. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I locked the car and headed back inside, double-checking that the front door was secure behind me. The house suddenly felt different, too quiet, too still. As I placed the wallet back on the counter, I felt a strange urge to check the locks on the windows. Moving room to room, I ensured everything was secure. Nothing was out of place, nothing seemed disturbed. And yet, the feeling of unease remained. It was as if someone had been in my space, had moved something of mine, and left without a trace. I sat down on the couch, wallet still in my hands, turning it over slowly. If someone had broken in, why wouldn't they take anything? Why move just the wallet and nothing else? It felt deliberate, like a message I couldn't decipher. I checked my phone, scrolling through notifications, looking for anything unusual. No missed calls, no security alerts from my home system. If someone had come inside, there should have been some sign of it, but there was nothing. The rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every sound, every small creak of the house settling sent a ripple of unease through me. I tried to distract myself with TV, but my mind kept drifting back to that wallet sitting in my car. Sleep didn't come easy. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence, feeling like something wasn't right. My thoughts ran in circles, trying to make sense of what had happened. But no matter how I rationalized it, the feeling wouldn't go away. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting long streaks across the floor. I got up, still groggy from restless sleep, and made my way to the kitchen. My eyes immediately landed on the counter where I had left my wallet the night before. It was gone. A chill ran down my spine as I stood frozen in place. My gaze darted around the room, searching for any sign of disturbance. Everything else was where I had left it, just the wallet was missing. My pulse pounded as I checked the front door. It was still locked. The windows were secure. There was no sign of a break-in, and yet my wallet was missing again. Dread pooling in my stomach, I grabbed my keys and rushed outside, my breath shallow. I unlocked the car, yanked open the door, and looked inside. There it was, sitting in the exact same spot on the passenger seat. My hands shook as I picked it up, flipping it open with stiff fingers. Everything was still inside. Nothing had been touched. It was as if someone wanted me to know they had been there. I swallowed hard, my heart hammering in my chest. Someone had to be messing with me. Someone had to have access to my house. But the locks were fine, the security system untouched. No alarms had gone off. The realization settled over me like a weight. Whoever or whatever had moved my wallet wasn't trying to steal. They were trying to get my attention. I didn't know what scared me more, the fact that they had access to my home, or the fact that they wanted me to know it. Story 5. I was sitting in my living room, absent-mindedly scrolling through my phone, when I heard it. My name spoken clearly from the other room. It wasn't loud, but it carried through the quiet house, distinct and unmistakable. I looked up, expecting to see someone standing in the doorway, but I was alone. A chill crept down my spine as I set my phone aside. The voice had come from the kitchen, or at least, that's what it sounded like. I stood up slowly, listening for any further sounds, but the house remained silent. I hesitated for a moment before taking a cautious step forward. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know why I was whispering. Maybe because deep down I knew I wouldn't get an answer. My footsteps were slow and deliberate as I moved toward the kitchen, my pulse quickening with each step. I reached the doorway and flicked on the light. The kitchen was empty. Everything was exactly as I had left it, the chair pushed under the table, the coffee cup still sitting in the sink. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. Still, I felt the weight of something unseen lingering in the air. I checked the back door, making sure it was still locked. It was. Every window was closed, the curtains drawn. There was no way anyone had been in here. But I knew what I had heard. The voice had been real, and it had said my name. I shook off the unease and told myself I was imagining things. Maybe I had dozed off and dreamed it. Maybe I was just tired. I returned to the living room, but the feeling of unease didn't fade. I kept glancing toward the hallway, half expecting to see a shadow moving in the dim light. Hours passed, and I forced myself to focus on other things. I turned on the TV, hoping the noise would drown out my nerves. By the time I went to bed, I had almost convinced myself it had been nothing. Almost. I woke up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding for no reason. The room was silent, the only sound the soft hum of the fan. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket up to my chin, trying to fall back asleep. Then I heard it again. And my name. This time it came from right outside my bedroom door. My breath caught in my throat, and my body went rigid. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to stay still. The voice was soft, almost gentle, but something about it sent a deep, primal fear through me. I didn't recognize it. It didn't belong to anyone I knew. I forced myself to move, slowly reaching for my phone on the nightstand. My fingers trembled as I turned on the flashlight and pointed it toward the door. The beam of light illuminated nothing but the wooden frame and the darkness beyond. The house was still, yet I could feel something watching me. I waited, listening for any further movement. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I gathered the courage to get up. I walked to the door and placed my hand on the doorknob, hesitating before turning it. The hallway was empty. I checked every room in the house, even though I already knew what I would find. Nothing. No signs of intrusion, no explanation for the voice. I stood in the kitchen again, my pulse still racing. The house felt different, as if it no longer belonged to Burr. Sleep was impossible after that. I stayed awake until the first hints of morning light crept through the windows. The fear from the night before dulled but didn't disappear. I tried to go about my day as usual, but the memory of the voice lingered. That evening I hesitated before turning off the lights. A part of me feared what might happen when the house was dark again. I kept the lamp beside my bed on, convincing myself it would help. It didn't. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every muscle tense. The house was silent, but I knew better than to believe it would stay that way. Hours passed, and just when I started to drift off, it happened again. My name. This time it came from the foot of my bed. A wave of cold terror washed over me as I bolted upright. My breath came in sharp, panic gasps. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it across the room. Nothing. But the air felt heavy, as if something had just been there. I refused to stay in that house another night. I grabbed my keys, threw on my shoes, and left without looking back. The moment I stepped outside, the weight lifted. The night air was cool, grounding me in reality. I got into my car and drove, not sure where I was going, only knowing I had to be anywhere but there. I stayed at a friend's house for the next few nights, too ashamed to tell them the real reason why. I made up an excuse about needing a break, about my house feeling too empty. But even away from home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. On the third night, I decided to go back, if only to prove to myself that I had imagined it. The house was just a house, I told myself. There was nothing waiting for me inside. I stepped through the front door and exhaled, trying to calm my nerves. Everything was exactly as I had left it. I turned on every light, unwilling to let the darkness settle in. The air felt normal. Maybe I had let my imagination get the best of me. But as I walked down the hallway, I stopped in my tracks. My bedroom door was open. I had closed it before I left. I knew I had. My pulse quickened as I stepped closer, peering inside. Something was different. It took me a moment to realize what it was. My bed sheets were pulled back, as if someone had been lying there. The lamp I had left on was off, and on my pillow in neat, precise handwriting was a note. It read only 2 words: "I'm here." I ran. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the ignition. The house loomed behind me, silent and dark, but I could feel it watching. I drove without a destination, knowing one thing for certain: I was never going back. Story 6. Late one night, I was lying in bed when I heard a faint sound drifting through the thin walls of my apartment. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I listened closer, I realized it was crying. A soft, muffled sob, the kind that came from deep sorrow. It was coming from the unit next to mine. I sat up, straining to hear. The crying continued, steady and broken, like someone was trying to hold it in but failing. My neighbor, Ms. Carter, lived alone. She was quiet, polite, and always kept to herself. Something about the sound unsettled me, an aching loneliness in each sob. After a few minutes, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I got up, slipped on my shoes, and stepped into the dimly lit hallway. Miss Carter's door was closed, the faint glow of light visible under the frame. I hesitated before knocking gently. The crying stopped immediately. The silence that followed was heavy, unnatural. I waited, my heart beating faster, listening for any movement. But the apartment remained quiet, as if no one had ever been there. I knocked again, this time a little louder. Ms. Carter. My voice sounded strange in the stillness. No answer. I tried the handle, but the door was locked. I pressed my ear against the wood, waiting, but there was nothing. Just the hum of the building settling. After another minute, I stepped back, feeling foolish. Maybe she had fallen asleep, or maybe she didn't want anyone to know she had been crying. I told myself to leave it alone and went back to my apartment, but I couldn't shake the eerie stillness that followed the moment I knocked. The next morning, I ran into Ms. Carter in the hallway as she was leaving for work. She looked the same as always, calm, composed, her gray hair neatly pinned back. There were no signs that she had been crying the night before. "Hey, I heard something last night," I said carefully. "Are you okay?" She frowned, tilting her head slightly. "Last night? I thought I heard you crying," I said. "I knocked, but you didn't answer." Her expression remained blank. "You must be mistaken. I went to bed early." There was something about the way she said it that made my stomach tighten. It wasn't just denial, it was like she truly had no memory of it. But I had heard it. I knew I had. I didn't push the conversation further. I forced a smile, nodded, and let her go. But all day, the thought nagged me. The crying had been so real, so raw. There was no way I had imagined it. That night, I stayed up later than usual, half hoping I wouldn't hear it again. But just past midnight, the soft sound returned. The same muffled sobs as if someone was trapped in grief. My chest tightened as I listened. This time, I didn't go to her door. I sat up in bed, waiting to see if it would stop on its own. But it went on for nearly an hour, never changing in tone, never breaking. The exact same sorrow, looping endlessly. A chill ran through me as I realized something felt wrong about it. The way it never wavered, never hiccuped, never grew softer or louder. It was almost rehearsed, a recording. I felt a growing sense of unease but forced myself to sleep. The next morning I saw Miss Carter again, but I didn't bring it up. She looked as calm as ever, smiling politely as she passed. If she had been crying all night, she showed no sign of it. The crying continued every night, always at the same time, always the same tone. I tried to record it, but every time I played it back, the sound wasn't there, only silence. I even knocked again one night, just to see if she would respond. She never did. The more I thought about it, the stranger it became. Ms. Carter had lived there for years, long before I moved in. No one ever visited her. She never spoke much to anyone in the building. It was like she existed on the edges, just barely a part of the world around her. One night, I decided to stay in the hallway, just outside her door. I waited for the crying to begin, wanting to hear it from the other side of the wall. When it started, I pressed my hand against the door, feeling the vibrations of the sound. It was coming from inside, but somehow it didn't feel alive. The sound played on, never changing. I knocked, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. "Ms. Carter?" I called. The crying stopped instantly. The silence that followed was suffocating. I stood there, waiting, but there was no movement, no sound of footsteps, nothing. Just a void of sound where the sobbing had been. I backed away, my skin crawling. I returned to my apartment, locking the door behind me. That was the last time I tried to confront it. A week later, Ms. Carter moved out. There was no warning, no announcement. One morning her apartment was just empty. The landlord mentioned she had left during the night. No forwarding address, no explanation. For the first time in weeks, there was no crying. The silence should have been a relief, but instead it unsettled me more. Because now, when I passed her door, I felt something else. A lingering weight, a shadow of something left behind. A few nights later, as I lay in bed, I heard it again. But this time it wasn't coming from her apartment. It was coming from inside mine. Story 7. The knock at my door was unexpected. I hadn't ordered anything, but when I opened it, a delivery man stood there, holding a medium-sized box. He looked down at his clipboard, then up at me. "Package for A. Daniel Whitmore," he said. I frowned, glancing at the shipping label. The address was mine, but I didn't know anyone by that name. "I think you have the wrong place," I said, shaking my head. The delivery man double-checked the label, then shrugged. "It's the right address," he said, handing me the box. I hesitated before taking it, my fingers brushing against the worn cardboard. "Are you sure this isn't a mistake?" I asked. The delivery man had already turned away, heading back to his truck. "It's yours now," he called over his shoulder. Closing the door, I placed the package on the kitchen table. The box was unmarked aside from the shipping label, which listed no return address. A strange unease settled in my stomach as I reached for a knife and sliced through the tape. Inside, layers of newspaper crinkled beneath my fingers as I pulled them aside. Buried within was an old wooden box, its surface scratched and worn. The lid had a simple latch, rusted with age. My breath hitched as I slowly lifted it open. Inside the box was a stack of black and white photographs. The top one caught my attention immediately. It was a picture of my house taken from the outside, the exact angle from where the delivery man had just stood. I flipped to the next one, my heart pounding. The second photograph showed my front door, slightly ajar. The third was of my living room, empty but eerily familiar. My hands trembled as I shuffled through the rest, each one bringing the camera closer, as if someone had been inside my house, documenting every corner. I shoved the box away, my pulse racing. This had to be a mistake, some kind of prank. But the air in my home suddenly felt different, heavier, like I wasn't alone. I turned toward the hallway, every creak of the floor beneath my feet making my skin crawl. My mind raced through possibilities. Had someone broken in? Was this a warning? My fingers hovered over my phone, ready to call the police, but something held me back. There was no direct threat, just a package meant for a stranger, delivered to my address. I forced myself to take slow, measured breaths. Maybe someone had lived here before me. Maybe Daniel Whitmore was a previous tenant. But then why would someone send him something now? And more importantly, why did the package end up in my hands? Determined to get answers, I searched the name online. The results were sparse, but one article stood out. The headline sent a chill through me. "Local man disappears without a trace, last seen at home." My stomach twisted as I clicked on the link. The article was dated 20 years ago. Daniel Whitmore had vanished one night, leaving behind all his belongings. The police found no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. His home, my home, was the last place he was seen. A noise from the hallway made me jerk my head up. It was soft, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. My throat tightened as I stood, listening. My own breath was the only sound in the room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was near. Summoning my courage, I stepped toward the hallway. The air was colder here, and the shadows seemed deeper. I checked each room carefully, my pulse hammering with every empty space I found. Nothing was out of place. Nothing except the growing certainty that I wasn't alone. I returned to the table, staring at the open box. There was one last photograph at the bottom. My hand shook as I lifted it. It was a close-up of a face. Pale, hollow eyes stared back at me, the features distorted as if the picture had been taken in a hurry. The hair on the back of my neck rose. The face was unfamiliar, yet something about it felt wrong. My grip tightened on the photo as a sudden knock rattled the door. The sound was sharp, urgent. My legs felt heavy as I moved toward it. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing but darkness. Another knock came, louder this time. My fingers hesitated on the doorknob, dread settling deep in my chest. I took a breath and opened the door. The hallway outside was empty. No delivery man, no visitor, just the quiet hum of the night. I stepped outside, glancing around, but there was no sign of anyone. Shutting the door behind me, I locked it, my hands clammy. I turned back toward the table, but my steps faltered. The box was gone. My heart lurched as I spun in circles, scanning the room. The table was empty, the photographs nowhere to be seen. I rushed to check every corner, every surface, but the package had vanished without a trace. A cold sweat broke out along my spine as I staggered backward. None of this made sense. Then, from the corner of my eye, I caught movement. A reflection in the window, someone standing just behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. My breath came in sharp gasps as I stared at my own reflection, searching for something, anything that would explain what was happening. But all I saw was my own pale face, wide-eyed with fear, and just beyond me, in the glass's faint distortion, a second shadow lingered. Story 8. Late one evening, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a new voicemail notification. I hadn't heard it ring, and there was no missed call on my screen. Curious, I pressed play and held the phone to my ear. A chill ran down my spine as I heard my name being repeated in a slow, monotonous voice. It wasn't spoken with any emotion, just a flat, eerie repetition of my name over and over again. The voicemail lasted nearly a minute before it abruptly cut off. My hands trembled slightly as I checked the number, but it was an unknown caller. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to call it back, my heart pounding in my chest. As soon as I dialed, the call went straight to voicemail without even a single ring. The automated message was blank, just silence before the beep. I hung up quickly, feeling uneasy but convincing myself it was some kind of prank. Still, as I lay in bed that night, the sound of my name echoed in my mind. The next morning I checked my phone again, hoping I had imagined it, but the voicemail was still there. I played it once more, and the same robotic voice repeated my name over and over again. I tried searching the number online, but nothing came up, not even a location. A heavy sense of dread settled over me as I deleted the voicemail, hoping that would be the end of it. Later that evening, as I was making dinner, my phone buzzed again with another voicemail. My stomach twisted as I unlocked my screen and saw it was from the same unknown number. My hands felt clammy as I pressed play, my breath catching in my throat. Once again, my name was repeated in that flat, droning voice. This time, however, the repetition was slower, dragging each syllable out as if savoring it. The voicemail was longer than the first, and by the end of it, I could hear a faint static in the background. My pulse quickened as I checked my call log. No missed call, just the voicemail. I tried calling back again, and once more, it went straight to dead silence. Feeling unsettled, I decided to block the number and put my phone down. I tried to focus on eating, but every bite felt tasteless as my mind kept circling back to the strange messages. After dinner, I turned on the TV for some distraction, but my thoughts remained restless. That night, sleep didn't come easy, and when I finally drifted off, I dreamt of a voice whispering my name from the darkness. The following morning, I hesitated before checking my phone, dreading what I might find. My heart dropped when I saw another voicemail notification. My fingers felt stiff as I pressed play, and the moment the recording began, a shiver ran through me. This time the voice was distorted, as if the speaker was underwater, but it still repeated my name slow, deliberate, endless. I couldn't take it anymore. I contacted my phone provider and asked if they could trace the number, but they said it was unregistered. Frustrated and unnerved, I explained what was happening, but the representative dismissed it as likely spam. I hung up feeling helpless, my unease growing with each passing second. Desperate for answers, I decided to reset my phone entirely, thinking that might break whatever strange loop I was trapped in. I wiped my device clean and changed my number, feeling a brief sense of relief. For the rest of the day, there were no new voicemails, and I let myself believe it was finally over. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in days. But my relief was short-lived. The next evening, my phone buzzed again with an unfamiliar number. Dread coiled in my stomach as I stared at the notification, my hands trembling. I opened the voicemail, my breath catching as I listened. The voice was back, repeating my name, but this time, there was something else. A second voice whispered beneath the first, so faint I almost didn't catch it. It wasn't repeating my name, it was saying something else, too garbled to understand. I turned up the volume, straining to make out the words, but the more I listened, the more my skin prickled with unease. There was something deeply wrong about the way it spoke. Panic surged through me as I deleted the voicemail and turned my phone off entirely. My mind raced with questions. Was someone watching me? How had they gotten my new number? I felt trapped, unable to escape from whatever had latched onto me. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my living room, too afraid to close my eyes. The next morning, exhaustion weighed heavy on me, but I forced myself to go about my day. I avoided my phone, not wanting to see any new messages. Hours passed, and for a while it seemed like nothing else would happen. But when I finally turned my phone back on that evening, my stomach lurched. There was another voicemail. I hesitated before pressing play, my entire body tensing. My name was repeated, slower than ever, each syllable dragging with an unnatural weight. The static in the background was louder, crackling like something shifting through an old radio. Just as I was about to stop the recording, the voice changed. It no longer sounded robotic or monotone. It sounded real, too real. It was my own voice now, whispering my name in a way that sent ice through my veins. My throat tightened as I listened, barely breathing. The message ended with a single, garbled phrase that made my stomach drop. I found you. I dropped my phone as if it had burned me, my pulse thundering in my ears. The room felt smaller, the air pressing in around me. I forced myself to take deep breaths, trying to steady my shaking hands. I needed to leave. I needed to be somewhere, anywhere else. I grabbed my keys and rushed outside, my heart pounding as I climbed into my car. The quiet night felt suffocating, every shadow stretching too long, too deep. I drove aimlessly, needing to put distance between me and whatever was happening. But no matter how far I went, the unease clung to me like a second skin. Eventually, I pulled into a gas station, needing a moment to collect myself. My hands were still trembling as I checked my phone again. No new messages. A part of me wanted to throw the device away entirely, but I knew it wouldn't matter. This thing, whatever it was, had already reached me. I stayed there for a while, watching people come and go, grounding myself in the presence of others. But the fear never fully faded. I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. And as I finally headed home, a single thought echoed in my mind. It would call again. Story 9. I stepped onto my porch and pulled open my mailbox. Among the usual bills and advertisements, there was a single white envelope with my name on it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat but urgent, as if written in a rush. I hesitated before opening it, my fingers trembling slightly. Inside, the letter was almost entirely blank. Only one word stood out in bold, black ink: run. My pulse quickened as I stared at the stark warning, the ink slightly smudged as if written with a shaking hand. I glanced around my quiet street, but nothing seemed out of place. I stepped back inside, shutting the door firmly behind me. The air in my house suddenly felt heavier, the walls pressing in closer than before. I placed the letter on the kitchen counter, trying to shake off the creeping unease settling in my chest. My mind raced through possibilities. Was this a prank, a mistake, or something more sinister? I picked up my phone, debating whether to call someone, but who would I even reach out to? The sound of rustling outside made me freeze. I turned toward the window, peeking through the blinds. A shadow moved near the edge of my lawn, slipping behind a tree just as I focused on it. I swallowed hard, my breath shallow. The streetlight flickered, casting long, shifting shadows along the pavement. I gripped the letter tightly, its message now burned into my thoughts. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I decided to check my security camera footage. Sitting at my desk, I rewound the feed to when I was inside. My mailbox had been empty earlier, but then, at some point, the camera glitched for a brief moment. When the footage resumed, the letter was there. No sign of anyone placing it, no movement, no footsteps leading up to it. Just a sudden jump in the timeline, and then it appeared. A tight knot formed in my stomach. I played the footage again, pausing at the exact moment of the glitch. Something was off, but I couldn't pinpoint what. I pressed my palms against the desk, trying to steady my breathing. A knock at the door made me flinch. It was soft but deliberate, each knock evenly spaced. My heart pounded as I crept toward the door, peering through the peephole. The porch was empty. I stood frozen, gripping the doorknob. Another knock came, this time from the back door. My stomach dropped as I realized whoever it was had moved without making a sound. My house was surrounded. I stepped back, my eyes darting to the nearest object I could use as a weapon. A heavy glass vase sat on the coffee table. I grabbed it, my hands clammy against the cool surface, my ears strained to catch any further noises. Silence settled, thick and suffocating. I waited, barely daring to breathe. Minutes passed, stretching endlessly, but no more knocks came. I slowly inched toward the back door, my grip tightening on the vase. Through the glass pane, the backyard looked undisturbed. The wind stirred the leaves, but there was no sign of movement. Still, the uneasy feeling clung to me, refusing to let go. I double-checked all the locks before returning to the letter. My fingers traced over the single word again. It felt less like a warning now and more like an order, a demand. My instincts screamed at me to listen. Ignoring my fear, I grabbed my keys and packed a small bag. I didn't know where I was going, but staying here no longer felt safe. The letter had found its way to me for a reason, and I wasn't about to ignore it. As I locked the front door behind me, a feeling of finality settled in. I glanced at my mailbox one last time, half expecting another message to be waiting. It was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching. I drove without a destination, my grip tight on the wheel. The streetlights blurred past, and the further I got from my house, the more I felt like I was making the right choice. The night stretched endlessly before me. Checking my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of something shifting in the backseat. My blood ran cold as my breath hitched. The road ahead suddenly felt far too dark, the silence pressing in too tight. A whisper brushed against my ear, barely audible but unmistakable. "You should have run sooner." My scream caught in my throat as my vision blurred. The car swerved, tires screeching against the pavement. My hands fumbled for control, but it felt as if something else had already taken over. The headlights illuminated an empty stretch of road. No sign of life, no sign of an end. The engine roared, and the car continued forward, carrying me into the unknown. Story 10. I stepped onto the late-night train, the cool metal of the doors sliding shut behind me. The station was nearly deserted, the platform bathed in the dim glow of the overhead lights. I glanced around as I made my way down the empty car, wondering why there wasn't a single soul in sight. The quiet was unsettling, even though I had grown used to late-night commutes. The sound of my footsteps echoed, amplifying the silence that seemed to fill every corner of the train. I settled into a seat near the window, hoping to make the most of the ride. My phone screen lit up with a few notifications, but I barely glanced at them. My mind was preoccupied with the stillness of the train. It was too quiet, even for a late-night trip. The hum of the train's movement should have been comforting, but it only seemed to highlight the eerie emptiness of the car. I glanced up, my eyes catching movement at the far end of the train. A figure stood there, still and motionless, just beyond the dim light that cast shadows across the car. My breath caught in my throat as I stared, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure was tall, its features obscured by the shadows. But what really unnerved me was that it wasn't moving, not even a slight twitch of the body. For a moment I thought I was imagining things, my mind playing tricks on me in the silence. But as I squinted, the figure remained unnervingly still. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I tried to convince myself that it was just another late-night passenger, but something about the situation felt wrong. The train rattled as it passed through the darkened landscape, but the figure at the end of the car didn't budge. I glanced around again, hoping to see someone else, anyone who could confirm that I wasn't alone in my growing sense of unease. But the car remained as empty as when I first boarded. I began to feel the weight of isolation pressing in on me, the silence thickening. I debated getting up to investigate, but something held me back. There was a gnawing fear in my gut, urging me not to move, not to get closer. It was as though the figure at the end of the train was somehow waiting. Waiting for what, I couldn't say, but the feeling of dread grew heavier with each passing second. The train's next stop came and went, the doors opening briefly before closing again, but still, the figure remained in place. The absence of other passengers made the situation even more surreal. Why was I the only one on the train? How could no one else be bothered by the presence of this silent figure standing at the far end? My thoughts spiraled, the logical part of my mind fighting to make sense of the situation, but it only fueled my unease. I looked away from the figure for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. My eyes scanned the train car again, the empty seats, the dark windows, and the flickering lights above. When I turned back to the far end of the car, the figure was still there, but now it was closer. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard any footsteps, no movement at all, but somehow it had moved. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was an illusion, a trick of the light, or maybe my own fear had distorted what I was seeing. But as I blinked, the figure was unmistakably closer, just a few feet from the door leading to the next car. It hadn't made a sound. I could barely make out any details from this distance, but I could see enough to know it wasn't just a trick of the imagination. I shifted nervously in my seat, my mind racing for a reason to explain what I was experiencing. But nothing made sense. The train was moving, the familiar clattering of the tracks vibrating beneath my feet, yet the figure stood as still as ever, its silhouette growing more distinct with each passing moment. The closer it got, the more my heart pounded. I couldn't move, couldn't bring myself to stand or even speak. It was then that I realized something even more unsettling. The figure was staring directly at me. There was no mistaking it now. Despite the distance and the shadows, its eyes seemed to bore into mine. My pulse quickened, and I felt a wave of panic surge through me. I opened my mouth to call out, to ask if anyone else was on the train, but the words stuck in my throat. My voice felt trapped, and I couldn't shake the sensation that something was wrong with this situation. The train sped on, the lights inside flickering intermittently. My mind spun with 1,000 thoughts, none of them making any sense. Was I dreaming? Was this some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion? I glanced down at my phone, desperate for some connection to reality, but the screen was blank and there was no signal. I turned back to face the figure, only to find it even closer now. It was standing at the door to the next car, staring at me with an intensity that made my stomach churn. I couldn't look away, even though every part of me screamed to run, to escape this unexplainable presence. But the train wouldn't stop. It kept speeding through the night, heading toward some unknown destination. I felt my breath catch in my throat as the figure slowly raised its hand, pointing directly at me. The gesture was slow, deliberate, as though it was signaling something. I couldn't tell if it was trying to communicate or if it was simply a threatening gesture. But either way, the movement sent a jolt of fear through my body. Then, without warning, the lights in the train flickered once more, and the figure vanished. I blinked, half expecting it to reappear. But when the lights returned to normal, the car was once again completely empty. I looked around, my eyes darting from seat to seat, but there was no sign of the man. It was as if he had never been there at all. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking beneath me, and stumbled toward the door to the next car. My hands fumbled with the handle, but the door wouldn't open. The train continued its journey through the night, its eerie quietness pressing down on me like a weight. I was left with the lingering question, had I imagined it all, or had I just shared a train ride with something far beyond the ordinary? Story 11. Every time I looked in the bathroom mirror, I noticed something new. It started innocently enough, a shadow in the corner that was never there before. A brief flash of something I couldn't quite identify. At first I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of the light or my mind playing games on me. But as the days went on, the shadows grew more defined and strange shapes began to appear, just out of sight. I tried to convince myself it was just a product of fatigue. After all, I had been working long hours and spending nights staring at screens. But when the face first appeared in the reflection, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't my own face either. It was pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare straight through me. I turned quickly, but there was no one behind me. The following day, the face was still there, lingering in the glass. This time it was clearer, almost as if it were pressing against the surface of the mirror. The mouth twisted into a faint smile, and my blood ran cold. I didn't know how it could be happening. How could this image, this figure, be existing just behind the reflection and not in reality? I wiped the glass, hoping the smudge was the culprit, but nothing changed. By now, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched. Each time I entered the bathroom, I hesitated, dreading what I might see. The face had grown more defined, its features sharpening with every passing day. It seemed to follow me, moving ever so slightly when I wasn't looking, as if it was becoming more conscious, more aware. I couldn't take my eyes off it, but when I blinked, it would shift position always a step ahead. The strange presence in the mirror began to feel like an intruder in my home. Every time I stepped in front of the sink, my heart would race, my breath shallow. I could no longer look at my own reflection without feeling a cold dread crawl up my spine. Even brushing my teeth became a challenge, as I couldn't tear my gaze away from that shadowy figure, its eyes always locked on me. One evening, after a long day at work, I stepped into the bathroom, my hands trembling. I had been avoiding the mirror for as long as I could, but tonight I had to face it. The air in the room was thick, almost suffocating, and I could feel my pulse quicken as I approached the sink. As I stood in front of the mirror, I forced myself to look into it, hoping to find some explanation for the madness I was experiencing. And then I saw it. The face in the mirror wasn't alone anymore. Standing beside it, almost indistinguishable from the rest of the shadow, was another figure, taller, darker, and far more menacing. It had no features at first, just a shape looming in the corner of the reflection. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at it, unable to tear my eyes away. The figure's presence was overwhelming, as if it had always been there, waiting for me to notice. I backed away slowly, my breath ragged. The new figure didn't move, but the first one, the face, did. It tilted its head to the side, as if it were studying me. My hands shook, and my mind raced to make sense of what I was seeing. What was happening? Why was this happening? I turned away from the mirror, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something was there, that something was watching me from behind the glass. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the face in my mind's eye, and every time I closed my eyes, I felt the presence of that second figure lurking in the shadows. My thoughts swirled in a chaotic mix of fear and confusion. Was I losing my mind? Or was something far darker at work? I couldn't stop thinking about the mirror, about the figures in it. The next day, I made a decision. I would cover the mirror, block it from view so I couldn't be reminded of the nightmare that had begun to consume me. I grabbed an old sheet and draped it over the glass, hoping that somehow it would bring me peace. For a brief moment, I felt a small sense of relief, as if the barrier between me and the mirror had shielded me from whatever was lurking in its depths. But that relief was short-lived. That evening, I returned home and found the sheet had been torn away. The mirror was exposed once again, reflecting nothing but the emptiness of the room. But as I stepped closer, I saw that the figure was back. This time it wasn't just one shadowy face, it was an entire crowd, their eyes all locked on me, their twisted, silent gazes following every movement I made. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't know what to do anymore. There was no explanation, no rational reason for what I was seeing. I felt trapped, cornered by my own reflection. It was as if the mirror had become a doorway, and whatever was inside had crossed over into my reality. I tried everything I could think of, covering the mirror, cleaning it, even moving it to a different room, but nothing worked. The figures would always return, always staring, always waiting. A sense of desperation began to settle over me. I was living in a constant state of fear, unable to escape the presence in the glass. The bathroom had become a prison, and I was its unwilling occupant. My thoughts became consumed with one singular question. What did they want from me? Why were they haunting me, tormenting me with their unblinking eyes and eerie stillness? I couldn't take it any longer. I needed to get rid of the mirror, destroy it, whatever it took to free myself from this nightmare. But as I stood in front of it one last time, ready to shatter the glass, something changed. The figures were no longer still. The face that had started it all stepped forward, its eyes glowing, its mouth stretching into a wide grin. It spoke to me, its voice a cold whisper that seemed to seep into my very bones. "You can't escape," it said. "We're already inside." The words echoed in my mind long after I turned away, unable to fight the growing realization that whatever had started in that mirror was far from over. Story 12. I was walking home after a late meeting, the street unusually quiet for that time of night. The only sound was the rhythm of my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The street lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the pavement, and the cool night air nipped at my skin. It felt like any other evening, peaceful and uneventful, until I noticed the figure ahead. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was just another person walking down the street like me. The figure was dressed in dark clothing, moving at a steady pace, their steps in sync with mine. I didn't see their face, only the back of their silhouette, barely visible under the dim streetlights. But there was something unsettling about the way they walked. No hurry, no hesitation, just a steady, methodical stride. I quickened my pace, eager to get home. The figure didn't seem to notice, never turning around or acknowledging my presence. As I closed the distance between us, I tried to shake off the growing unease creeping up my spine. Maybe it was just my imagination, I thought. I had been working late, after all, and exhaustion was starting to set in. But no matter how fast I walked, I couldn't seem to catch up. The figure stayed just ahead, their pace unchanging. I picked up my speed, walking faster, almost to a jog, but the distance between us remained constant. My breath came quicker now, my heart starting to pound. This was ridiculous. It was just some person out for a walk, I told myself. I had nothing to worry about. But something felt off. The closer I got, the more I noticed how eerily still the figure was. They didn't glance over their shoulder, didn't show any sign of awareness of my presence. It was as if they were walking for the sake of walking, with no destination in mind and no reason to turn around. I began to wonder if they were even aware of me at all. I slowed down, thinking maybe I had misjudged the distance. I wasn't running now, just walking quickly, but still the figure stayed ahead. I stopped completely, my breath fogging in the air, and watched them for a moment. Nothing. No change. No sign of movement from the figure other than their steady steps. A wave of discomfort washed over me. Something about the situation didn't make sense. If they were walking at the same pace as me, I should have passed them by now. But I hadn't. It was like they were waiting for something. I glanced around, but there was no one else on the street, no other signs of life. I was completely alone. The silence between us was thick now, pressing in on me. The quiet night felt suffocating, and my instincts screamed at me to turn around, to leave, to get away from this person. But I couldn't move. I felt rooted to the spot, my legs stiff with hesitation. What if they noticed me looking? What if I was being watched from behind? I shook the thought away. I was overthinking this. I had to keep moving. I turned back toward the figure and began walking again. determined to leave the strange encounter behind. But as I moved forward, I noticed the distance between us had barely changed. The figure was still there, just ahead, as though they had been expecting me to catch up. At this point, I felt like I was in some kind of twisted game. The more I walked, the more I tried to close the gap, the more it seemed the figure adjusted their pace to keep the same distance between us. It was maddening. I began to walk faster again, desperate to get closer, to pass them, to put an end to this. But no matter how fast I went, they stayed exactly where they were. My mind raced. This was impossible. My legs were burning from the effort, but the figure remained unbothered, moving at their steady pace. How was this happening? I glanced behind me, half expecting to see some sort of chase, but the street was as empty as it had been. No one was there, just me and the figure. I tried to call out, but my voice came out strangled, like it had been caught in my throat. "Hey!" I shouted, but the figure didn't react. They didn't even flinch. The eerie calmness of it all made my skin crawl. This wasn't normal. No one walks like this, not without purpose, not without acknowledgement of the world around them. A new panic rose within me, clawing at my chest. I had to get away. I spun around, ready to run, but my feet felt like they were glued to the pavement. It was as if something was holding me in place, as if my body was unwilling to listen to my mind. The figure, still moving just ahead, seemed to grow even more distant, as though the distance between us stretched with each passing second. Then, as I turned back again, I noticed something strange. The figure wasn't just walking anymore. It was moving in slow, deliberate circles, as if toying with me. I froze in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. The figure's movements became erratic, as if they had anticipated my every step, weaving in and out of my vision with ease. I couldn't keep up. I couldn't stop them. I couldn't even reach them. The fear set in with full force now. I was no longer just walking down a quiet street. I was part of something I didn't understand. I couldn't tell if the figure was moving toward me or away, but I couldn't break the pattern. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling at my sides. I could hear the pounding of my own footsteps, growing louder, faster, more frantic as I tried to shake off the fear and keep moving forward. But nothing worked. The figure just stayed ahead, unbothered, eerily calm. I had to stop. I had to take control. I stepped off the sidewalk into the shadows of an alley, but even there I felt the presence of the figure, still moving just ahead. It was as if they had followed me into the darkness, as if they were part of the night itself. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the figure stopped. The air was thick with the absence of movement. I looked up, heart hammering, and the street was completely empty. No figure, no strange presence, just the echo of my own footsteps in the distance. I was alone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that, even in the silence, I was still being watched. Story 13. The flickering started just after lunch. At first, I thought it was a minor electrical issue, something that would resolve itself by the time the workday ended. But it didn't. The lights above my desk flickered intermittent, casting brief shadows across the office. It wasn't the usual hum of faulty wiring. It felt different, more deliberate, as though something was messing with the lights on purpose. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my work as the day stretched on. But every time I looked up, the lights would flicker again, casting strange shadows that seemed to move just out of my line of sight. The sense of unease grew, the way it always does when something's wrong, but you can't figure out what. I thought about checking the breaker box, but I didn't want to be the one to get stuck fixing it. Around 6 p.m., long after most of the office had emptied out, I decided to take a break and get some coffee. The lights were still flickering, more erratically now, as if they were struggling to stay on. I went into the small kitchen area, trying to shake the odd sense of discomfort creeping over me. When I returned to my desk, the flickering seemed to intensify. I sighed and pushed my chair back, irritated. If it kept happening, I'd have to report it to maintenance, but they'd probably just send someone to turn the lights off and on again. It was always like that. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through emails to distract myself. But just as I tapped on an unread message, I heard something footsteps. My head snapped up, eyes darting to the door. The hallway outside my office was empty, the floor silent as it always was after hours. Yet, I swore I heard someone walking down the hallway, their shoes tapping softly against the tile. The footsteps stopped just outside my office. I blinked, trying to steady my nerves. I glanced over at the lights, which were still flickering, casting longer, more exaggerated shadows against the walls. I stood up and walked toward the door, my heart pounding. The building was supposed to be empty, just me and the cleaning crew in the halls. I opened the door, poking my head into the hallway, but it was as empty as I'd left it. The air felt cooler than usual, and the silence seemed heavier. I closed the door slowly, still unnerved by the sound of footsteps I couldn't explain. As I sat back down, I shook my head, telling myself I was just imagining things. The flickering light was getting to me. I sat down at my desk, staring at my computer screen. The sudden urge to check the security footage struck me, even though I knew there was nothing to see. I opened a file on my desktop, scrolling through the recorded footage from the hallway in my office. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. The footage showed the hallway outside my office, dark and quiet. But as I clicked through to the timestamp just before the lights had started flickering, something caught my eye. There, at the far end of the hallway, a dark figure stood. It was barely visible, just a silhouette against the dim light, but I could see enough to know it wasn't anyone I recognized. The figure didn't move at first. It just stood there, in the shadowed corner of the hallway, watching. I felt a chill creep down my spine. I paused the footage and replayed it, watching closely as the figure remained still, unmoving, almost as if it were waiting for something. The lights flickered again in the video, just like they had in real life. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Who was that? Why hadn't I seen anyone walk by my office? The security footage showed no one else in the building. The figure should have been impossible to miss, yet I hadn't seen it when I was walking in the hall just moments ago. I ran the footage again, slowing it down. The figure was now closer, standing directly outside my office door. My pulse quickened as I realized something was terribly wrong. The person or whatever it was hadn't made a sound. The footsteps I'd heard earlier, the ones I assumed were just in my head, seemed to match up with the figure's movement in the footage. The figure's features remained blurred, as if the camera couldn't capture them properly. It was almost as if it was being deliberately hidden from the view of the lens. I leaned closer to the screen, squinting, when the lights in the video flickered once more, and when they came back on, the figure was gone. I froze, staring at the empty hallway on the screen. My hand hovered over the mouse, trying to steady my breath. The feeling of dread in my chest intensified. It wasn't just the lights or the figure in the footage. It was something else, something that made my skin crawl. I was being watched. I glanced nervously at the door again. The hallway outside was still empty, and the footsteps were gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me just out of sight. I closed the security footage, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. Maybe it was just a glitch, a trick of the light, I told myself. But deep down I knew it wasn't. My phone buzzed on the desk, making me jump. I picked it up and saw a message from a colleague. "You still at the office?" I hesitated for a moment before responding. "Yeah, just finishing up some work." "Why?" "Check the hallway cameras. I'm not sure what's going on, but it's happening again." I blinked at the message, my blood running cold. I opened the security footage again, scrolling back to the earlier timestamps. But as I clicked through, I saw something that made my heart stop. The figure from the video, the one I had thought was a trick of the light, was there again, standing in the hallway. And this time it was closer. It was almost as if the figure was moving toward my office, inch by inch, every time the lights flickered. Story 14. I woke up one morning to the usual flood of notifications on my phone, but one message caught my eye. It was from a local dental office, confirming my appointment for the following day. The message was clear. "Your appointment is confirmed for tomorrow at 3 p.m. See you then." I blinked at the screen, confused. I hadn't scheduled any dentist appointment recently, or ever, for that matter. At first, I brushed it off as some sort of mistake, maybe a typo or an automatic reminder sent to the wrong number. But as I thought about it more, a sense of unease settled over me. Why would they send a confirmation for an appointment I didn't remember making? I glanced at my calendar, but there was nothing listed for the date. I checked my past messages for any mention of the office, but I found nothing. The more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. My hands felt cold as I dialed the number from the text. The phone rang several times before a cheerful receptionist answered, her voice bright and professional. "Good morning. How can I assist you today?" she asked. I hesitated before speaking, trying to mask the confusion in my voice. "I received a text confirming an appointment for tomorrow at 3 p.m., but I don't remember scheduling it," I said. "Could you help me look into this?" The receptionist's tone remained upbeat as she checked her system. "Let me pull up your information," she said. I waited in silence, my mind racing. Maybe it was a mistake, or perhaps they had mixed up my name with someone else's. Either way, I just wanted to cancel and move on. After a few moments, she returned to the line. "I see your name here, and it looks like you've been in before," she said. "You had an appointment last year, actually, and we did some routine work on your teeth." I froze. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, my voice tightening. "I don't remember ever being to your office." The receptionist paused, almost as if she were double-checking her notes. "Yes, according to our records, you were here last year. We did a cleaning and a checkup." But I had no recollection of this appointment. My mind drew a blank. I tried to picture myself in a dentist's chair, but I couldn't. I had no memory of ever sitting through an appointment, no flashes of sterile white walls or the hum of dental equipment. The very idea that I had been to this office was like a distant, impossible thought. "I don't know what to tell you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I really don't remember being there." The receptionist sounded sympathetic but firm. "I understand this may be confusing, but we have your information here. If you'd like, I can cancel your appointment for tomorrow." I agreed to cancel the appointment, my mind still racing. The whole thing was strange, unsettling. Why couldn't I remember something so ordinary? Surely I would have remembered a trip to the dentist, especially if it involved anything more than a cleaning. The memory just didn't exist. After I ended the call, I found myself pacing around the apartment. I was starting to feel a little unhinged. Why would I forget an entire dentist appointment? I pulled out my phone again and opened my calendar app, hoping to find some trace of the appointment there. Nothing. There were no notes or reminders about a dentist visit. I checked my email, my past messages, even social media, searching for any clue that might jog my memory. Still, nothing. The whole situation felt wrong, like I was missing something important. It was like the pieces of my own life were being slowly erased. I had no memory of ever seeing this dentist, yet their records said otherwise. My mind spun in circles as I tried to come up with a logical explanation. Was it some kind of mistake? Could I have gone to a different office and forgotten? Or worse, could I have had some sort of lapse in memory? That evening, as I tried to shake off the unease, I kept thinking about the words the receptionist had said. You were here last year. What if it wasn't a mistake? What if I had been to this office, but something had happened during that visit? I couldn't let it go, and the more I thought about it, the more my stomach churned. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the appointment. I kept checking the time, waiting for something to happen. At 3 p.m., I found myself at the dentist's office, standing outside the door. My heartbeat quickened as I stared at the familiar sign above the entrance. It looked the same as it had in the picture I had found online when I Googled the place earlier. The waiting room was full, the familiar hum of the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, but everything inside felt foreign. I stepped inside, feeling like I was intruding on a space that wasn't mine. The receptionist, a different person than the one I had spoken to on the phone, greeted me warmly. "How can I help you?" she asked, her smile polite but professional. I hesitated before speaking. I received a text confirming an appointment for today, but I don't remember scheduling one. I also called yesterday and was told I had an appointment here last year. I'm just confused. She looked at me quizzically before her expression softened. "We have you on our schedule for today, but I can see that you've been here before. Would you like to come in for your appointment now?" I shook my head, unable to suppress the growing anxiety in my chest. "No, I think I need to leave. I don't remember anything. I don't even remember being here before. Something isn't right." As I left the office, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I was forgetting, something important. I didn't know how or why, but I knew something was missing from my memory. My past was slipping through my fingers, and I wasn't sure how to hold on. Every time I tried to remember, the details seemed to fade, like a dream I couldn't wake up from. I couldn't help but wonder how much of my life had already been forgotten without me realizing it. Story 15. It was a quiet night as I drove down the long stretch of highway, the headlights illuminating the empty road ahead. I had been driving for hours, the hum of the tires against the asphalt and the occasional flicker of the streetlights the only sounds accompanying me. The night was cool, the kind of cold that clung to your skin even with the windows rolled up. I glanced at the rearview mirror, noticing the dark emptiness behind me. There were no cars in sight, no signs of life in either direction. I was used to driving late at night, the solitude giving me time to think, but tonight something felt different. It wasn't the road or the darkness, but the air inside the car thick, almost as if someone else was there with me. I shook off the feeling and tried to focus on the road. But as I glanced to the right, a chill crawled up my spine. The passenger seat was visibly indented, as though someone was sitting there. I had been driving alone, and the seat had been empty when I started. My heart skipped a beat as I turned my head quickly, expecting to see someone in the seat beside me. But when I looked, the seat was empty. There was nothing there. The indentation in the seat was still there, though. It was as if someone had been sitting there moments ago, their weight pressing into the cushion. My pulse quickened, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I quickly turned my eyes back to the road, gripping the steering wheel tightly. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I had just seen. It could have been a trick of the light, I told myself. Maybe the way I had adjusted the seat earlier made it look like someone had been sitting there. But deep down, I knew it didn't make sense. The feeling in the air was wrong, heavy with an unexplainable presence. I tried to distract myself, focusing on the road ahead. The night felt unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that made every small sound seem amplified. The wind howled as it rushed past the car, and the occasional creak of the car's suspension echoed in the stillness. But then, just as I took a breath to steady my nerves, I felt it again, someone watching me. I glanced to the passenger seat once more. The indentation was still there, but this time it looked deeper, as if the weight of the unseen passenger had grown. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The air seemed to grow colder, and my hands tightened around the wheel. I wanted to speed up, get away from whatever this was, but something held me back, something that kept me driving straight ahead. In the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a movement, a flicker of something, a shadow perhaps. I turned my head quickly, but again there was nothing. The passenger seat was empty. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to keep my focus on the road, my grip on the wheel so tight my knuckles were white. The silence pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. And then, in the quiet, I heard a sound, a soft, almost imperceptible noise, like a breath. It came from the passenger seat. My body froze, and my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't bring myself to look, but the sound of breathing was unmistakable. It was steady, deep, like someone was sitting beside me, right there in the car, just out of sight. I turned my head slowly, and my eyes locked onto the seat. The indentation was gone. The seat was perfectly flat, but the air around me felt different now, charged, as if something was right there, waiting for me to acknowledge it. My pulse raced, and my hands were slick with sweat. I swallowed hard, trying to calm myself. This wasn't happening. I was imagining things, I thought. Maybe it was the exhaustion of the long drive, playing tricks on my mind. But as I reached for the radio, hoping the distraction would ground me, the volume on the dial seemed to twist, flickering between static and faint whispers. I turned it off in a hurry, my heart hammering in my chest. Just then I felt the weight of the presence again, but this time it wasn't just on the seat. It was all around me, like the air itself had become thicker, more suffocating. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something in the back seat, but there was nothing. The car seemed to accelerate on its own, the speedometer creeping higher without me pressing harder on the pedal. I tried to slow down, but the car's movements felt out of my control. The weight in the passenger seat grew heavier, as if whatever was sitting there was now pressing its presence on me, its invisible gaze burning through me. Panic began to settle in. I couldn't explain what was happening, but I could feel it, that unshakable certainty that something was very wrong. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, and the world outside the car grew darker, the shadows deeper. I couldn't stop looking at the passenger seat, waiting for anything to happen. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the presence disappeared. The air lightened, the seat returned to normal, and the car's movement became steady again. I glanced over, and for a moment, I wondered if it had all been a figment of my imagination. But the memory of the weight, the breathing, the eerie feeling of being watched, lingered in my mind. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town. I pulled into the first gas station I could find, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. The car sat still, quiet now, as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew what I had felt, and no amount of rationalizing could erase it. That night, I never spoke about it to anyone. I didn't even tell anyone where I had been. But every time I drove at night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the presence was still there, just waiting for the right moment to return. Story 16. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the world outside seemed to be holding its breath. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when a flicker of movement caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just the shadows playing tricks on me, but then I noticed them, a family of 4 standing across the street, perfectly still. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The family was dressed in old-fashioned clothing, the kind you might see in a photograph from the 1950s. The father was tall and broad, the mother smaller, with long, flowing hair that shimmered in the streetlight. 2 children stood beside them, a boy and a girl, their faces pale and expressionless. I leaned closer to the window, my breath fogging up the glass as I stared at them. They were all facing my house, their eyes locked onto me with unnerving intensity. The way they stood, unmoving, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Time seemed to stretch, and I couldn't look away. An hour passed. Then 2. The family didn't budge. I felt my pulse quicken, a sense of unease creeping over me. What were they doing? Why hadn't they moved? I glanced around my living room, half expecting to see someone else in the reflection of the window, but the room was empty. Just me and them. I checked the clock. 3 hours had gone by, and still they stood there, facing me. The street was deserted. No one else seemed to be aware of the family, as if they were the only ones who could see them. My fingers trembled as I reached for my phone to take a picture, but when I looked back at the window, the family was gone. I froze, staring out into the darkness. Had I imagined it? I rubbed my eyes, looking again, but the street was empty. The family was no longer across from me. My heart raced, confusion and fear mixing in a cocktail that left me dizzy. Maybe I had been staring too long. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. The mother's face appeared, reflected in the glass of the window. Her eyes were wide, her expression vacant. I snapped back, my breath catching in my throat. She wasn't there, she couldn't be. I moved away from the window, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. My legs were shaky as I turned the lights on, hoping the brightness would chase away the lingering fear. I sat on the couch, clutching my phone tightly, my eyes darting to the window every few seconds. I couldn't stop glancing at the spot where the family had stood. It wasn't until later that night, as I was preparing for bed, that I noticed something strange. A faint tapping sound, like the soft knock of fingers on glass, came from the window. My heart skipped a beat. I slowly turned toward the sound, but nothing was there. I checked the locks on the windows and doors, just to be sure, but everything was secure. The tapping persisted, just a light, rhythmic sound, almost like a heartbeat. I couldn't bring myself to look at the window again, terrified of what I might see. The longer the tapping went on, the more frantic it became. The noise echoed through the house, making my skin crawl. Eventually it stopped. The silence in the house was suffocating, but I didn't feel relieved. The absence of sound left a heavy weight in the air. I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to calm my breathing. What was happening? Why were they watching me? I didn't sleep that night. I kept the lights on in every room, checking the windows every few minutes, but I saw nothing. The tapping never returned, but the feeling of being watched never left. Every time I looked out, I expected to see the family standing there again, staring at me with those blank, lifeless eyes. The next morning I tried to shake off the unease. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me after a long day. I went about my usual routine, but something inside me nagged, urging me to take one more look outside. I went to the window and peered out across the street. To my horror, the family was there again, standing in the exact same spot as before. It was as if no time had passed. They were still as statues, their faces pale and vacant, staring at me with that unsettling intensity. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my coat and rushed out the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to confront them, to figure out what was going on. The street was empty, eerily quiet as I crossed to the other side. When I reached the spot where the family had stood, there was nothing. No traces of their presence, no footprints in the snow, nothing but empty pavement. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. And then I heard a voice. It was soft, almost a whisper, but it came from behind me. "You shouldn't have come." I spun around, my heart in my throat, but there was no one there. Only the empty street stretched out in front of me. The voice echoed in my mind, repeating the words over and over. "You shouldn't have come." I turned and ran back to my house, slamming the door behind me. I locked it and leaned against it, my chest heaving. I didn't know what was happening, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the family had been waiting for me to make a move. They had been watching me, and now it was too late to turn back. The silence in my house felt suffocating. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me. Every creak of the floorboards amplified in the stillness. I couldn't escape the feeling that they were still out there, just beyond my door, waiting for me to look again. And I knew deep down that if I did, I would see them again. Story 17. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sterile, cold glow over the rows of snacks and drinks at the convenience store. It was around 2 a.m., and the night shift had been particularly quiet. I was used to the emptiness by now, the stillness that settled in after the last customer had left. The only sounds in the store were the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rustle of plastic bags as I restocked the shelves. I stood behind the counter, flipping through a magazine to pass the time, when the phone rang. It was unusual for the phone to ring at this hour, and I immediately felt a sense of unease. The only calls we usually got during the night were from the delivery driver or the occasional wrong number. I glanced at the display on the phone, and there was no number listed, just an anonymous call. I hesitated but picked it up anyway. "Hello, this is the convenience store," I said, trying to sound casual, though I could feel a knot forming in my stomach. The voice on the other end was low and quiet, but unmistakably clear. "I'm watching you," the voice said, sending a shiver down my spine. I froze, holding the receiver to my ear, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. There was a pause, just long enough for me to feel the weight of the words sink in. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly, but the line was silent. No response came, just the quiet hum of the phone line. I felt a sense of panic rising in my chest, and my first instinct was to check the security cameras. I reached for the monitor mounted above the counter and clicked through the different angles, each camera focused on different parts of the store. But there was no one there, no shadowy figure lurking in the aisles, no sign of movement anywhere. Everything appeared perfectly normal, just as it should be at this hour. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm myself. Maybe it was just a prank, a sick joke from someone who had nothing better to do in the middle of the night. But something about the way the voice had spoken unsettled me. It wasn't just a random phrase, it was deliberate, cold and calculated. I quickly ended the call, but the unease lingered, gnawing at me. I returned to the cameras, checking them again, feeling a little ridiculous for having doubted myself. But the more I stared at the grainy footage, the more I began to feel like I wasn't alone. Every flicker on the screen seemed to take on more meaning. Every shadow in the corner of the camera's view seemed to stretch a little too far. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Minutes ticked by, and the silence in the store felt heavier than before. My eyes kept darting to the front door, half expecting it to open at any moment. But it remained locked, the automatic doors staying firmly shut. It was then that I heard a soft shuffle, just outside the store. My heart skipped a beat, and I instinctively turned to the window, expecting to see someone standing there, watching me. But nothing was there. The parking lot was empty, bathed in the harsh light of the street lamps, just as it had been when I first arrived for my shift. Still, the noise had been unmistakable. It wasn't the wind, nor was it the hum of the building. It was something different, something closer. My pulse quickened, and I stood there for a moment, trying to decide what to do. I couldn't just stay inside forever, paralyzed by fear. I had a job to do, and I couldn't let this strange encounter throw me off. I walked slowly toward the door, my eyes scanning the parking lot. There was no sign of movement, just the usual emptiness. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, and stepped outside for a moment, half expecting someone to jump out at me from the shadows. But the lot was as quiet as it had been before. I stood there for a few seconds, looking around, before I convinced myself that I was being paranoid. Maybe I was just imagining things. As I re-entered the store, my eyes instinctively went back to the security monitor. This time I checked the cameras in more detail, zooming in on the sections where I'd seen the most activity earlier. But again, everything was as it should be. The aisles were empty, the counter was bare, and the shelves were neatly arranged. Still, the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I picked up the phone again, my fingers trembling as I stared at it, wondering if the caller would try to reach me once more. The silence in the store pressed in on me, and I could almost hear the faintest echo of my own breathing. I was about to put the phone down when it rang again. My heart jumped into my throat as I grabbed the receiver, my voice catching in my throat. "Hello?" I said, trying to steady myself. This time there was no response at first, just the same eerie silence that had followed the previous call. And then, finally, the voice came again. "I'm still watching you," it said, the words creeping into my mind like a poison. The same cold, emotionless tone, as if the speaker were standing just behind me, watching my every move. My blood ran cold, and I felt my legs weaken. The phone slipped from my hand, falling to the counter with a loud clatter. I quickly checked the security cameras once again, my heart hammering in my chest. But nothing was different. I was about to hang up when the line suddenly went dead. The silence that followed felt oppressive, filling the store with an eerie quiet that was too much to bear. I stood there, frozen for what felt like an eternity, trying to process what had just happened. The phone call. The voice. The strange feeling that had crept into my bones. I was beginning to feel like I wasn't just being watched, I was being hunted. I glanced around the store again, my eyes scanning the shelves, the aisles, the parking lot outside. But everything seemed to be as it should be. Yet, the dread that had settled in my chest wouldn't go away. The call had left a mark on me, something I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. Hours passed, and the store remained eerily quiet. The rest of my shift went by in a blur, my mind constantly drifting back to the strange voice. When my shift finally ended, I quickly locked up and rushed out, eager to leave the store behind. But as I drove home, the words "I'm watching you" echoed in my mind, and I couldn't help but feel that the night wasn't over yet. Story 18. I was driving down a deserted stretch of highway when my car sputtered and came to a stop. The engine died, leaving me in complete silence, surrounded by nothing but trees and darkened road. I quickly turned the key again, but nothing happened. Panic set in as I realized I was miles away from the nearest town, with no one in sight to help. I grabbed my phone and tried dialing 911, but the screen froze halfway through the call. My thumb hovered over the screen, pressing the dial button again and again, but it remained unresponsive. I felt a tight knot in my chest, realizing that without my phone I was truly stranded. Just as I was about to give up and try to flag down any passing cars, the screen blinked back to life. I breathed a sigh of relief, but that relief quickly turned into confusion. A text message appeared on the screen, but it wasn't from anyone I recognized. The message simply said, "Don't bother." My heart skipped a beat. The phone wasn't just malfunctioning, it was mocking me. I tried to swipe away the message, but it wouldn't go away. The text remained on the screen, its ominous words staring back at me. I tried to turn the phone off, but the power button wouldn't respond. I pressed harder, but the screen stayed lit, showing only that chilling message. My mind raced, searching for any explanation. Was this some kind of glitch, or something worse? As the minutes ticked by, I felt a growing unease. The trees around me, which had once seemed so still, now felt oppressive, as if they were closing in. I looked around, half expecting to see someone watching me, but there was nothing. No cars, no signs of life, just the darkness stretching for miles in all directions. I tried once more to call 911, but the screen froze again. This time, when it blinked back to life, another text message appeared. "They're coming for you," it read. My stomach lurched, and I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. My hands shook as I held the phone, staring at the message in disbelief. I quickly tried to turn the phone off again, but the buttons refused to respond. The screen was now a chaotic mess of static and messages, each one more unsettling than the last. "I'll run," it said. "You can't escape." My heart pounded in my chest as I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. I looked around the car, feeling trapped. The road stretched on endlessly, but there was no sign of anyone. No headlights in the distance, no movement anywhere. The only sound was the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. I tried to open the car door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged within me as I realized I was locked inside, my phone the only connection to the outside world, and it was no longer working. The temperature inside the car seemed to drop, the air growing thick and suffocating. I tried to roll down the window, but the power windows wouldn't respond either. I was completely stuck. As my breath grew more shallow, I heard something. A faint noise, almost like a whisper, but it was coming from inside the car. I whipped around, but the back seat was empty. I was about to scream when I saw the reflection in the rearview mirror. A figure stood just beyond the reach of the headlights, their outline barely visible in the darkness. My breath caught in my throat. The figure wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call for help. As I reached for it, the screen flickered to life again. The text that appeared now made my blood run cold. "Don't look back." I froze, every muscle in my body screaming at me to ignore it, to drive away and never look back. But I couldn't. My eyes were drawn to the mirror, to the figure that had not moved an inch. It was still standing there, just watching. Then, The phone buzzed in my hand, sending a jolt of panic through me. The screen flashed once more, and the message read, "They're right behind you." My heart leaped into my throat, and I whipped my head around. The figure was no longer standing by the side of the road. Now, it was at my window, its face obscured by the shadows. I could hear its breath, slow and deliberate, as it pressed its face against the glass. I recoiled, my skin crawling as I backed away from the door. The phone buzzed again, and I didn't want to look. But I did. The message read, "No escape." I slammed the phone onto the floor of the car, but it continued to buzz with incoming messages. I could hear the figure breathing, its exhale fogging up the window as it pressed closer. I was trapped. I tried the door again, but it still wouldn't open. I pounded on the window, hoping to get the figure's attention, but it just stood there, silent and unmoving. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. I had to get out. I had to do something before it got worse. Suddenly, the phone stopped buzzing. I looked down at it, the screen now completely black. I reached for it again, but it was as if the device had died. The quiet in the car was deafening. I could no longer hear the figure outside. I held my breath, listening, but the silence remained. I dared not look out the window again. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, unsure of what to do next. All I knew was that I was no longer alone. The figure was still out there, waiting for me. And the phone, once my only connection to the outside world, was now a dead weight in my lap. Whatever was coming for me had already found me. Story 19. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone when the message notification popped up. I didn't recognize the number, but it was from my own contact, my phone number, to be exact. The message was simple but chilling. "Tonight, you'll see me again." I stared at the screen, my heart suddenly racing. How could this be? I hadn't sent anything like this to myself, let alone something that felt so ominous. The message was sent days before I could have written it. For a moment, I thought it was some sort of prank. Maybe someone had spoofed my number, or it was a glitch in the system. But the more I thought about it, the less I could convince myself it was anything so innocent. I looked at the time, 8:45 p.m., and realized I had just about 5 hours until the message's prediction came true. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread creeping up on me. I checked my phone again to see if there were any more messages from my number, but there was nothing. Only that single text. I tried calling my voicemail, hoping for some explanation, but the line was silent. It only made the whole situation feel more surreal. Who had sent it? And what did it mean by "see me again"? I couldn't recall any recent encounters that would require such a message, but my mind raced through all possible scenarios. I wasn't sure I wanted to see whoever had sent it, or whatever they were implying. I spent the next few hours trying to distract myself. I went for a walk around the block, hoping to shake off the anxiety gnawing at my insides. The streets were quiet, and the air felt unusually still for a spring evening. I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be following me, though I saw no one. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that I was just overreacting. But something about the message, the fact that it had come from my own number, stayed with me. When I got back home, I double-checked the time, 10:10 p.m. I had less than an hour now. The tension in my chest grew tighter, like a constant weight pressing down on me. I tried to rationalize things again. Maybe it was some weird automated text, a mistake, or even a hoax. But there was still the matter of the timing. How had it been sent days before I could have even written it? The logic of it escaped me. At 10:45 p.m. I couldn't sit still anymore. My phone buzzed and I jumped, feeling my pulse spike. I was almost afraid to look at it. What if it was another text, one that pushed me closer to some kind of confrontation? Slowly, I unlocked the screen. It was another message from my number, but this one was different. It simply read, "Come to the old park by the lake." My stomach dropped. I hadn't thought about that park in years. It was the same park I used to visit as a child, the place where I had spent countless summer afternoons with my friends. But there was something unsettling about it now. The lake had dried up years ago, leaving behind a dusty, cracked basin, and the swings in the playground creaked eerily in the wind. It was a place that hadn't seen life in a long time, and now I was being asked to go there, alone. I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door, feeling the cool night air hit me as I stepped onto the empty street. The further I walked, the more the world seemed to fade into the background. My thoughts were consumed by that text. Who could have known about the old park? Why did they want me to go there? And most importantly, who was this me that had sent the message? The walk felt longer than usual. The streetlights flickered as I passed under them, casting long, distorted shadows. I reached the park in what seemed like no time at all, but the familiar trees and empty swings only made the place look more desolate. I hesitated, standing at the edge of the darkened park, the cold night air wrapping around me like a blanket of dread. My phone buzzed again and my hands shook as I pulled it out of my pocket. Another text, again from my own number, "I'm here." I looked around, but the park was silent. The empty benches and playground equipment loomed like ghostly figures in the darkness. There was no sign of anyone, no movement at all. I stepped closer, drawn by some unknown force. My mind screamed for me to turn around and leave, but my feet wouldn't obey. The swing set creaked, moving ever so slightly in the breeze. I stopped in my tracks. The swing wasn't empty. Someone was sitting in it. I couldn't see the person's face, but I knew instinctively that this was the me from the messages. They didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. They simply sat there, staring straight ahead. I took a cautious step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. I stepped closer, hoping for some kind of response. But as I reached the swing, I realized something chilling. The figure was dressed exactly as I was. The same jacket, the same shoes, even the same jeans. It was me, but not me. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead as the realization sank in. The figure slowly turned its head toward me, and I saw my own face, pale and expressionless. There was no warmth in the eyes, only an empty void. My breath caught in my throat, and I took a step back. "What do you want?" I whispered, fear clutching at my chest. The figure didn't speak. It just continued to stare, a slow, unsettling smile forming on its face. It was then that I noticed the text that had come through. The final message, "You finally found me." I stumbled backward, my mind spiraling as the figure in front of me began to rise from the swing, stepping toward me with slow, deliberate movements. My body went numb with terror. And then, as I turned to run, I saw the last thing that made my blood run cold. My phone, which had dropped from my hand, had a new text on it, this time sent after the encounter. It simply read, "It's your turn now." Story 20. The first time I saw the house, I didn't think much of it. It was an old, rundown place on the edge of town, barely visible through the thick trees that surrounded it. No one ever talked about it, and the few people who passed by it either gave it a wide berth or didn't seem to notice it at all. It had always been there, just another forgotten relic of a bygone era. But that day, as I walked past it, something tugged at me, a feeling, almost like a whisper, urging me to stop. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the wind or my imagination playing tricks on me. But something about that house, something about its crooked windows and peeling paint stayed with me. I didn't know why, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me, that it wanted me to come closer. That night I found myself thinking about it, wondering what secrets it hid behind those boarded up windows. The next morning, as I was out for a walk, I found myself at the house again. It was still standing there, looming like an ancient sentinel in the woods. This time I couldn't resist. I crossed the overgrown yard and walked up the creaky porch steps. The door was slightly ajar, as if inviting me in, though I wasn't sure by what force. I hesitated for a moment, my heart beating faster than usual, but curiosity won out. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of decay. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and I noticed the walls were lined with old, yellowed photographs of families I didn't recognize. Their eyes seemed to follow me as I moved through the house, a strange, unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. I couldn't help but notice how still everything was, how untouched by time. It was as if the house had been waiting for someone to walk through its doors. I wandered through the rooms, each one more dilapidated than the last. The furniture was covered in dusty sheets, and broken windows let in a dim, gray light. As I reached the back of the house, I found a staircase leading up to the attic. A chill ran down my spine as I stared up at the narrow, winding stairs, but something compelled me to go up. Maybe it was the whisper in my mind, or perhaps it was just my need to explore the unknown. The attic was dark, save for a single shaft of light coming through a crack in the ceiling. I stepped inside and was immediately struck by the coldness of the room. The air felt thick, almost oppressive. There was a small chest at the far corner, covered in dust and cobwebs. I approached it, my hands trembling as I brushed away the cobwebs. When I opened the chest, my heart stopped. Inside was a collection of old dolls, their faces cracked and their eyes staring blankly. But it wasn't the dolls that caught my attention, it was what lay beneath them. A small, leather-bound book sat at the bottom of the chest, its cover worn and faded. I picked it up, feeling an odd sense of reverence. The pages inside were yellowed and fragile, but the words were still legible. As I flipped through the pages, a feeling of dread began to settle in the pit of my stomach. The book was a journal, written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. It described strange happenings in the house, whispers in the night, shadows moving when no one was there, the feeling of being watched. The entries grew more erratic, more desperate, until the last page was simply a drawing of a figure, tall and thin, with long, spindly fingers. Beneath it were the words, "It watches, it waits." A cold gust of wind blew through the attic, making the pages of the book flutter. I slammed it shut, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I turned to leave, but the door to the attic was no longer there. I spun around, panic rising in my chest, and found myself staring into the dark hallway of the house. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, as if they were alive, crawling toward me. Suddenly I heard a creak behind me, followed by the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and heavy. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. I turned, slowly, expecting to see a figure emerge from the darkness. But there was nothing there, nothing but the thick shadows that now seemed to encircle me. I backed away, my breath coming faster as I stumbled down the hallway. The footsteps followed, growing louder, closer. I turned to look again, but still saw nothing. I was trapped, my mind racing as I searched for a way out. The whispers began again, low and urgent, like voices just out of reach. I ran down the stairs, my feet pounding against the creaky floorboards, but the house seemed to stretch before me, the door at the end of the hallway farther away with each step. As I reached the front door, I grabbed the handle, only to find it cold and unyielding. I yanked at it, pulling with all my strength, but the door wouldn't budge. The footsteps were now right behind me, and I could feel a presence in the room, an oppressive, suffocating force that pressed down on me. The shadows seemed to grow longer, swallowing the light, and then I heard a voice, low and guttural, whispering in my ear. "You shouldn't have come." I screamed, but no sound came out. The air around me grew colder, and the darkness closed in. I slammed my body against the door, desperate to escape, but it was as if the house itself was holding me captive. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the figure in the corner of the room, tall, thin, with long, spindly fingers reaching toward me. When I woke up, I was outside the house. The sun was setting, and the house loomed in the distance, silent and still. I couldn't remember how I had gotten there, or how long I had been lying on the ground. I stumbled to my feet, my body trembling with fear, and looked at the house one last time. The windows were dark, but I could have sworn I saw something move inside. I never went back to that house, but sometimes, when the wind howls through the trees at night, I can still hear the footsteps behind me, following me wherever I go. And I know, deep down, that the house is still waiting, still watching. Story 21. The elevator lurched to a halt, the lights flickering above me as the smooth hum of the machinery fell into an unsettling silence. I glanced at the digital display, but it was stuck between the 4th and 5th floors. My finger hovered over the emergency button, but before I could press it, I heard a soft click and the elevator doors slid open on their own. I wasn't sure if I should be relieved or terrified, but as I looked out, I realized that what lay beyond the doors wasn't the usual floor of the office building. Instead of the familiar hallway lined with gray carpet and white doors, there was only darkness, an unnerving stretch of dimly lit corridor that seemed to go on forever. The walls were bare, and the flickering overhead lights barely illuminated the space, casting long, shifting shadows. The air was thick with a stale, musty scent, and I felt an odd chill seep into my skin, despite the warm temperature in the elevator. My heart began to race, and I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should step out and investigate or simply wait for the elevator to resume its normal function. Curiosity got the better of me, and against my better judgment, I stepped out of the elevator. The hallway was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the lights overhead. I peered down both directions, but there were no signs indicating where this hallway might lead. The building was supposed to be only a few stories tall, and I knew for sure that there was nothing like this on the 4th floor. I took a few steps forward, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the silence, and as I did, I became acutely aware of a figure standing at the far end of the corridor. The figure was tall, shrouded in shadow, and I couldn't make out any details at first. My breath hitched in my chest, and I froze. It was too still, too perfect, like a mannequin that had been left abandoned in the hallway. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge me in any way, but I could feel its presence, an overwhelming sensation of being watched, studied. It was as if it was waiting for me to make the next move, to acknowledge its existence. I took a step back toward the elevator, my hand reaching for the door button, but I paused when I realized it had already closed behind me. Panic surged within me, and I pushed against the cold metal doors, but it wouldn't open. I felt trapped, isolated and completely disoriented. How had the elevator moved on its own, and why was I now standing in this strange hallway? The figure at the end of the hallway shifted slightly, and my heart skipped a beat. It hadn't moved before, but now, its presence seemed even more defined. It was as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. I didn't know why, but I had an overwhelming feeling that it wanted me to come closer. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my instincts screamed at me to run, to get out of there. But I couldn't bring myself to turn away. The hallway stretched on, the walls closing in on me as I stepped forward once again. My footsteps echoed louder in the silence, each one amplifying the sense of unease that gripped me. As I walked toward the figure, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow connected to the malfunctioning elevator, to the sudden shift in my surroundings. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening, but no logical explanation came to mind. This wasn't possible. There was no way I had somehow stumbled into a part of the building I didn't know about. As I neared the figure, it remained motionless, almost as though it were waiting for me to speak. But no words came. I couldn't bring myself to say anything, the dread that had settled in my chest holding me in place. There was something about the figure, something unsettling, that made it impossible to look away. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel its gaze, cold and unblinking, burning into me. I took a deep breath, willing myself to stay calm, but the air around me seemed to grow heavier, thicker, as though the very atmosphere was pressing in on me. I was just a few feet away from the figure when it finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, it began to step toward me, its movements unnervingly fluid, like something that wasn't quite human. My pulse quickened, and I instinctively took a step back. It didn't speak, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its presence envelop me, as though it were drawing closer to something far darker than I could comprehend. The hallway, the building, everything around me felt wrong. The figure stopped just within arm's reach, and I could finally make out some details, though they only made everything worse. Its skin was pale, unnaturally so, and its eyes, though hidden in the shadows of its hood, glowed faintly with a sickly, yellow light. I didn't want to look any closer, didn't want to see the face I knew was hidden beneath that dark hood. But I couldn't tear my eyes away. Something was pulling me in, something insistent, something that made me feel as if I were in the presence of something ancient and malevolent. A voice echoed in my mind, faint at first, but growing louder with each passing second. It was a whisper, a low and rasping sound, like a voice calling from the other side of the world. You shouldn't be here. The words sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt the coldness of the figure's gaze penetrate into my very bones. My legs felt like they were made of lead, and I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed, caught in some kind of trance, trapped in this hallway with the figure that seemed to be growing taller, more imposing, with every second that passed. My heart pounded in my chest, my breaths coming in shallow gasps, and all I could do was stand there, unable to escape. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the figure vanished. One moment it was there, its presence suffocating, and the next it was gone, leaving only the faint echo of its whisper behind. I staggered backward, gasping for breath, my heart racing in my chest. The hallway was empty, silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. I turned around and saw the elevator doors slowly creak open once again. I didn't hesitate. I ran toward the elevator, stepping inside without a second thought. The doors closed behind me, and the machine began to move, slowly at first, then faster, until I was back on the floor I had intended to reach. I stumbled out into the familiar hallway, breathing heavily, the memory of the figure still fresh in my mind. I never spoke of what happened in that building. No one would have believed me anyway, but I always made sure to avoid that elevator from then on. And whenever I passed the building late at night, I couldn't help but glance at the top floors, wondering if the figure still waited in the shadows, watching for the next person to step into its world. Story 22. I woke up in the middle of the night to an overwhelming sense of unease. My surroundings were eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the fan spinning above me. I slowly opened my eyes, still groggy from sleep, and glanced over at my partner's side of the bed. The sheets were undisturbed, and the spot where they had been just hours ago was now empty. For a moment, I thought I might have dreamt it all, the warmth of their body beside me, the soft rise and fall of their chest as they slept. I rubbed my eyes and sat up, trying to shake off the lingering fog of sleep. But when I turned to look again, the bed was still empty. The silence in the room felt thick, as though it were pressing in on me. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. My mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. I had been so sure they were next to me when I drifted off to sleep. I could still feel the lingering warmth of the spot they had occupied. Maybe they had gotten up for a drink of water or to use the bathroom, I thought. But the house was quiet, too quiet. If they had gotten up, surely I would have heard something. I threw the covers off and swung my legs over the side of the bed, the cold floor making me wince. The room felt colder now, the stillness unsettling. I stood up, my feet dragging against the wooden floor as I made my way toward the door. I peered into the hallway, half expecting to see my partner standing there, perhaps in the middle of a late-night snack or searching for something in the kitchen. But the hallway was dark, with only the dim light of the moon seeping through the windows. I walked slowly down the hallway, calling out their name, but my voice sounded strange in the stillness, like it didn't quite belong to me. There was no answer. I reached the living room and found it empty, the soft glow of the television screen casting long shadows across the furniture. The house felt unnervingly vacant, like something was missing. Where could they have gone? I checked the kitchen next, even though I knew they wouldn't be there. The counters were clean, the refrigerator door slightly ajar. I closed it absent-mindedly, my mind swirling with confusion. I checked the bathroom, though I didn't expect them to be there either. It was as if the house itself had swallowed them whole. Panic began to rise in my chest as I tried to think logically, but it was hard to focus on anything other than the gnawing sensation of something being wrong. I returned to the bedroom, standing at the door and staring at the empty bed once more. The sheets were still cold where they had been. I checked the closet, half expecting to find them hiding or asleep in there, but it was empty as well. I ran a hand through my hair, frustration mixing with the anxiety that was growing by the second. It had only been a few minutes, but it felt like hours. The feeling of being alone in the house was suffocating, as if the walls were closing in around me. I paced back and forth, trying to come up with an explanation, but nothing made sense. They couldn't have left without a word, not without telling me where they were going. It wasn't like them to just disappear in the middle of the night. I went outside, hoping to find them in the yard or out on the porch, but the cold night air hit me like a shock. The yard was dark, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic in the distance. There were no signs of life. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I turned back toward the house. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I grabbed my phone from the table, my fingers trembling as I unlocked it. I scrolled through my messages, trying to find any hint of communication from my partner. There was nothing, no missed texts, no calls, nothing that would explain where they had gone. I quickly dialed their number, holding my breath as it rang, but it went to voicemail after just a few rings. I left a message, my voice sounding unsteady as I spoke. "Hey, it's me. Where are you? Are you okay? I woke up and you weren't in bed. Please, just let me know what's going on." I ended the call, staring at the screen as if expecting a reply, but there was nothing, just silence. I went back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, my hands clasped together in my lap. The room felt colder now, the darkness pressing in on me. The thought that they could have just disappeared was almost too much to bear. What if something had happened to them? What if they were hurt? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more terrifying than the last. I lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to calm my racing thoughts. But the room felt oppressive, like it was closing in around me. Every creak of the house, every faint rustle outside, seemed to echo in the silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, something I couldn't see. Just when I thought I might lose my mind from the worry and fear, my phone buzzed. I shot up, heart pounding in my chest, and grabbed it from the nightstand. It was a text message. My hand shook as I opened it. It was from my partner. "I'm sorry. I had to go for a walk. I didn't want to wake you. I'll be back soon." Relief washed over me like a wave, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. A walk, in the middle of the night. I couldn't understand why they hadn't woken me up or at least left me a note, but at least now I had an answer. They were okay. They were coming back. I texted back, trying to hide the shakiness in my fingers. "Don't scare me like that. Please, just come back soon." I put my phone down, leaning back against the headboard, and took a deep breath. The anxiety was starting to ease, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. My partner's message had come so suddenly, so unexpectedly, that it felt almost too easy. Still, I told myself I was just overthinking things. Minutes passed, then hours. As I waited, I found it harder and harder to shake the sense that something was off. Maybe it was the timing of the walk. Maybe it was the fact that they hadn't returned yet. But when I checked my phone again, I saw that there were no new messages. Story 23. I had just returned from a week-long hiking trip in the mountains. It had been a peaceful and quiet retreat, just what I needed to escape the stress of work and life in the city. As I sat down at my desk to upload my photos, I couldn't help but smile as I scrolled through the pictures. The breathtaking views, the stillness of the forests, and the joy of spending time with friends were all captured in each shot. But one photo stood out, and not for any good reason. It was a picture I had taken on the last day of our trip, at the edge of a cliff overlooking a valley. The sky was a soft gradient of pink and orange, the kind of sunset that made you pause and take in the world around you. But there, in the background of the photo, was someone I didn't recognize. A person standing off to the side of the frame, just at the edge of the trees. They weren't part of the group, and they certainly weren't anyone I remembered seeing on the rigs. I stared at the photo, my heart rate increasing as I zoomed in on the figure. The person was looking directly at the camera, their face partially obscured by shadows, but there was no mistaking it. They had dark hair and a jacket that seemed a little out of place compared to what anyone else in our group was wearing. I couldn't recall seeing anyone fitting that description while we were hiking, let alone someone who had been that close to our group. My first instinct was to brush it off. Maybe it was someone else who happened to be near the cliffs at the same time. I had taken the photo at a wide angle, so it was possible they had just wandered into the frame. But as I thought about it, a sense of unease crept over me. I remembered clearly the hike that day, and I was certain no one else had been near us. I showed the photo to my friends later that evening when we all gathered for dinner. They didn't recognize the person either. We went over the details of our trip again, but no one could place them. The more we talked about it, the stranger it seemed. If someone had been there, surely we would have noticed them. It was a popular spot for hikers, but we had been alone when I took the photo. As the night wore on, I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone had been passing by. Maybe it was a random hiker who had been on a separate trail. But the longer I looked at the photo, the more unsettling it became. There was something in the stranger's eyes, a coldness that didn't match the peacefulness of the landscape. They weren't just looking at the camera, they were staring, as if they knew they would be seen. The next day, I decided to visit the trailhead again, hoping to get some clarity. I drove back to the park and walked along the trail leading to the cliff. I tried to picture the spot where I had taken the photo. The view from that ledge was gorgeous, but now, standing there again, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The area was empty, as expected. There was no one around, just the quiet hum of the wind and the distant call of birds. I pulled up the photo on my phone again, staring at the figure in the background. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of it. I retraced my steps, looking for anything that might explain the presence of someone in the photo. But there was nothing, no sign of a person, no trail, nothing that would suggest someone else had been there. As the days passed, the image of the stranger continued to haunt me. I showed the photo to a few more strangers, people who weren't involved in the trip at all, and they all reacted the same way. They couldn't place the person either. Some even suggested it might be an optical illusion, or perhaps a trick of the light, but I wasn't convinced. What troubled me the most was the way the figure looked. Their eyes seemed too intense, too deliberate, as though they were aware of something I wasn't. I began to second-guess my own memory. Had I missed something on the trip? Was there a part of the trail I had forgotten about? A place where people could hide just out of sight? That night, I went over the photos again, trying to distract myself from the growing sense of dread. I zoomed in on the stranger's face, trying to make out any details. And then, just as I thought I saw something, a shadow, or maybe a shape in the background, something changed. I blinked, and when I looked back at the photo, the figure was gone. At first I thought I was imagining things, but as I checked and rechecked the image, I realized it was true. The person had vanished. The space where they had been was empty. The photo had changed, and the figure who had once been so prominent was now just gone. My heart raced. I checked the other photos from the trip, scrolling through each one, hoping it was just a glitch in my phone. But everything seemed fine. It was only this one photo that had altered. I tried to convince myself it was some sort of error with the file, but the strange feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I couldn't stop thinking about the vanishing figure. Who were they? How could they have been in the photo? And why had they disappeared? What did it mean? The more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I hadn't imagined the person in the background. There was no way I could have. I had seen them, and now they were gone, as if they had never been there at all. Days turned into weeks, and I never found an explanation for the mystery. The photo remained a puzzle I couldn't solve. I thought about deleting it, erasing the evidence of something I couldn't understand, but I couldn't bring myself to. There was something about it, something unsettling that made me keep it, to hold on to the memory of that strange, vanishing figure. And sometimes when I look at that photo, I swear I can see the faintest outline of the person again, just at the edge of the frame, watching me. Story 24. I had just returned home from a long day at work, the familiar quiet of the evening wrapping around me as I stepped through the door. But something felt off the moment I entered. My eyes immediately went to the living room window, where I could see the shards of glass scattered on the floor. A heavy lump formed in my throat as I stepped closer. The window was broken, the glass still twinkling like diamonds across the floor. But what made the situation even more bizarre was the note that sat on the windowsill, nestled amidst the shards of glass. "I'll be back soon." It was written in a slanted, almost hurried script, as if the person had been in a rush. I blinked, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There were no signs of forced entry, no bent door frames, no overturned furniture, nothing to suggest a struggle or a break-in. Just the broken window and that unsettling note. My mind raced. Who would break a window without taking anything? I quickly scanned the room, checking to see if anything else was missing, but everything appeared in place. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my thoughts. I pulled it out and saw that it was a message from my neighbor, James. "Hey, I noticed something weird today. You weren't home, but I saw someone in your yard earlier." I didn't get a good look, but they were definitely there. I felt a chill spread through me. James wasn't the type to make things up, and I couldn't deny the sinking feeling in my stomach. Someone had been in my yard, and now this. I didn't know if it was just a coincidence, but the pieces didn't seem to add up. Why would someone break my window and leave a note behind? I quickly locked the door behind me and grabbed my phone to call the police. The dispatcher's voice was calm as I explained the situation. I came home to find a broken window and a note that says, "I'll be back soon. I haven't touched anything and I don't know who it could be." She took down the details, promising to send an officer to investigate. The minutes that followed seemed to stretch into hours. My mind kept returning to the note, its words repeating in my head like an echo. What did it mean? And more importantly, who was coming back? I tried to keep calm, but it was hard. The thought of someone entering my house while I wasn't there sent a wave of unease through me. I sat on the couch, my phone in my hand, unable to focus on anything but the window. The silence in the room felt thick and heavy, like the calm before a storm. About 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I jumped, my heart racing, and rushed to open it. Standing there was a police officer, his face set in a serious expression. "Ma'am, we need to take a look around," he said. I stepped aside to let him in, explaining what I had found. The officer inspected the broken window, glancing around as he took in the scene. "Everything seems undisturbed," he said, his voice low. "But we'll take a look outside, too." We stepped into the yard, and I watched as the officer surveyed the area. My mind was still spinning, trying to come up with any explanation, but nothing made sense. There was no sign of forced entry through the door, and the yard was clear, no footprints, no signs of anyone having been there recently. I glanced at the officer, hoping for some answers, but his expression remained neutral as he made a few notes on his notepad. "Do you have any enemies or anyone who might want to harm you?" he asked after a moment. I shook my head. "No, not that I know of," I replied. "This is just strange." The officer nodded, but his eyes lingered on the broken window for a moment longer before he turned to leave. "We'll patrol the area tonight," he said, "but keep an eye on things and let us know if anything else happens." I nodded, though I couldn't help but feel that his words were meant to comfort me more than anything. He was polite, but I could tell he didn't have much to go on. Neither did I. The officer left, and I was once again alone in my house. I tried to push the anxiety away, but it lingered like a shadow, always just behind me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind outside felt like it was a signal, like the person who had broken in was still nearby, waiting to return. That night, I barely slept. I kept checking the windows, making sure everything was locked. The note still sat on the windowsill, mocking me with its simple message, "I'll be back soon." What did that mean? It felt like a threat, but in the strangest, most subtle way. It didn't tell me when or how, just that something was coming. The next morning, I called James, hoping to find some clarity. "Did you see anyone last night?" I asked him, trying to keep my voice steady. James was quiet for a moment before he answered. "No, but I did hear something strange," he said. "Around midnight I heard footsteps outside your house. It sounded like someone walking around, but when I looked out, there was no one there." My stomach tightened. "Footsteps," I repeated. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "I thought maybe it was you, but then I remembered you hadn't come home yet. I didn't want to be nosy, but it was weird." I thanked James for the information, my mind racing. Footsteps outside my house at midnight. That seemed to fit with the idea that someone had been watching me, waiting. But for what? The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept looking out the windows, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, waiting for their moment to strike. But nothing happened. As the night approached, I couldn't help but feel that the person who had broken my window would return, just like the note had said. The silence was deafening, each minute stretching on forever. I glanced at the clock, and the hours seemed to pass in slow motion. But nothing came. The night passed without incident. In the days that followed, I never saw the person who had left the note. The window remained broken, but no one ever came back. The note was eventually thrown away, but the sense of unease lingered. I had no answers, no closure, just a nagging feeling that I had been part of something larger, something I could never fully understand. Story 25. I walked into the dimly lit party, the hum of conversation and laughter filling the air. The familiar scent of perfume and cologne lingered, mingling with the faint trace of alcohol. I tried to shake off the unease that always seemed to settle in when I was surrounded by too many strangers, but tonight felt different. Something about the room seemed off, though I couldn't quite place my finger on it. As I navigated through the crowd, a glance at the refreshments table caught my attention, and I paused to grab a drink. It was then that I noticed the man standing by the window, leaning against the wall, wearing the exact same shirt I had on. I blinked in confusion. It wasn't a common design, a dark green button-down with thin black stripes, one of my favorites, and I was certain I had never seen anyone else wear it. But there he was, looking almost like a mirror reflection of myself. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Was it a coincidence? I didn't think so. It was one of those rare shirts that you didn't see often, and I had bought it only a few months ago. My curiosity got the better of me, and I slowly walked over to him, trying to make it seem casual. "Hey, nice shirt," I said, hoping to break the awkwardness. He looked up at me, his expression blank at first. Then, as if recognizing something, his lips curled into a slow, unsettling smile. "It's my favorite too," he replied, his voice calm but carrying a strange edge to it. The way he said it made my skin crawl, like he was saying something far more cryptic than he intended. I laughed nervously, unsure of how to respond, and quickly glanced away, hoping the moment would pass. but he didn't seem to take the hint. He stepped closer to me, as if to make sure I couldn't escape the conversation. His eyes locked with mine too intensely, too steadily. "It's rare to find someone with such good taste," he continued, his voice too smooth, too deliberate. I tried to pull back, but the air between us felt charged, heavy with something I couldn't quite identify. "I guess we just have the same sense of style," I said awkwardly, my hand instinctively clutching the drink in my hand. My mind raced, trying to think of a way to leave without seeming rude. But the man didn't budge. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if studying me. "Yes," he said slowly. "It's almost like we were meant to wear the same shirt." I laughed, but it didn't come out as naturally as I had hoped. The entire conversation felt wrong, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I tried to make light of it, but something about him felt familiar in a way that made no sense. I didn't know this man, yet there was something about his eyes, his presence, that felt like I had seen him before. The party seemed to blur into the background as I became fixated on him. Every word he spoke felt too rehearsed, too calculated, and every movement seemed deliberate. He didn't seem like someone who simply stumbled upon this shirt by chance. No, it felt like he knew exactly what he was doing. The longer I stayed in his presence, the more I felt like I was sinking into something deeper, something darker. The conversation dragged on, but my mind was racing. "So where'd you get your shirt?" I asked, trying to break the eerie tension that had settled between us. His grin widened, but there was no warmth in it, only an unsettling sense of recognition. "Oh, I've had it for a while. Been wearing it for years." His words were slow, deliberate, like he was savoring each one. I took a step back, wanting to distance myself, but something stopped me. My hand reached instinctively for my phone, only to find that the screen was black. I tapped it again, but it remained unresponsive, almost as if it had shut down entirely. The man noticed, and his eyes flicked briefly to the phone, a strange glint in his gaze. "No need for that," he murmured. "You don't need to call anyone." I froze, my heart racing. The way he spoke made it seem like he knew exactly what I was thinking. The weight of his words seemed to pull me in, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I was no longer in control of the situation. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves were closing in around me. I shifted uncomfortably, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that was crawling up my spine. "I think I need to go," I muttered, turning away from him. I tried to push through the crowd, but somehow, the man was right behind me, moving with a fluidity that made it seem like he had been following me for far longer than I had realized. His presence was suffocating, and I could feel his gaze on the back of my neck. I reached the door, my pulse pounding in my ears, but as I turned the handle, it didn't budge. The door was locked. Panic started to rise in my chest. I turned back to look at him, but he was no longer standing where he had been. Instead, he was right in front of me, just a few inches away, smiling that same unsettling smile. "You can't leave yet," he said softly, his voice now barely more than a whisper. "Not yet." The room seemed to tilt, and everything around me started to blur. I could hear the muffled sounds of the party in the background, but they felt distant, unreal. My breathing quickened, and I stumbled back, trying to shake off the dizziness that was overwhelming me. The man's figure seemed to distort, flickering like a mirage, but his eyes remained fixed on mine, unblinking, unyielding. I forced my hand against the door once more, my heart pounding in my chest, and this time it opened. I didn't look back as I fled into the night, the cold air hitting me like a shock. I ran down the street, my feet pounding against the pavement, and didn't stop until I reached my car. As I sat there, catching my breath, I glanced in the rearview mirror. I could still see his smile burned into my mind, haunting me like a nightmare that refused to fade. The man with the shirt, my shirt, hadn't just been a coincidence. Somehow I had been pulled into something much larger than I could ever have understood. I didn't know what he wanted or why he had been there, but I knew one thing for certain. I would never wear that shirt again. Story 26. I had fallen asleep after a long day of work, the kind of deep sleep where nothing could disturb you. The house was quiet, the only sounds the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the house settling. I'd locked every door and window before going to bed, a habit I didn't even think about anymore. It was just a way of life in my small, quiet neighborhood. Then came the bang. It wasn't a soft sound, but sharp and jarring, as though something heavy had fallen. I shot up in bed, heart racing. I looked around the room, my eyes darting from the dark corners to the half-lit clock on my nightstand. The soft glow from the streetlight outside filtered through the curtains, casting strange shadows across the walls. But nothing seemed out of place. Still, something felt wrong. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I listened for any sound, any movement. But there was nothing, just the quiet of the night pressing in on me. I glanced at the window, and my stomach lurched. It was open. The window was wide open, letting in the cool night air. I distinctly remembered locking it before I climbed into bed. I could have sworn it was locked, the latch securely in place. But now it was open, the curtain gently swaying in the breeze. I felt a cold chill creep down my spine as my thoughts raced. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, my feet landing on the cold wooden floor. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet seemed amplified in the silence. My mind started to swirl with possibilities. Someone had gotten into the house, had opened the window to sneak inside, and I hadn't heard a thing. But I hadn't heard anyone come in, not a single footstep or rustling sound. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the open window. A gust of wind blew in, rustling the curtains more violently. The faint smell of wet grass and night air mixed with the stale scent of the room. I had to check. I had to make sure there wasn't anyone hiding in the shadows. I walked toward the window slowly, my every step heavy with hesitation. When I reached it, I hesitated again, my hand hovering near the frame. There was no sign of forced entry. No sign that anyone had broken in. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my breath, then pulled the window shut. The latch clicked into place with a satisfying sound. Still, something gnawed at me. Why had it been open in the first place? I turned back toward the room, feeling uneasy. My mind raced through all the possible explanations. Maybe I had forgotten to lock it. Maybe the wind had somehow opened it, but none of it made sense. The noise had sounded like something had crashed, something heavy. I walked around the room, checking under the bed and the closet behind the curtains. There was no sign of anyone. Nothing was disturbed. I grabbed my phone, thinking I should call the police, but hesitated. What would I even tell them? That I heard a loud bang and found my window open. It felt ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to check the rest of the house. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of the streetlights outside. My feet moved silently across the carpet as I made my way to the